In this video, we'll be breaking down the most chaotic Family Guy episodes. Let's get started. In episode Partial Terms of Endearment, Family Guy has a banned episode, like actually banned from US broadcast television. The kind of ban that makes network executives sweat through their suits and lawyers draft emails at 3 a.m. This episode deals with abortion, surrogacy, and pretty much every hot-button reproductive rights issue you can cram into 22 minutes of animation. Lois attends her college reunion and runs into Naomi, an ex-girlfriend from her experimental college days. Peter immediately assumes he's about to live out every sitcom husband's fantasy of a threesome, because of course he does. He spends the entire setup doing increasingly unhinged porn scenarios around the house, while Lois tries to have a normal dinner party. Pizza delivery guy bit? Check. Stern professor routine? Absolutely. Train conductor threatening passengers? Why not? The man commits to the bit like he's auditioning for the adult film Olympics. The actual request turns out way different. Naomi and her husband Dale reveal they can't carry a pregnancy to term themselves. Their eggs won't attach, which sounds like a tragic biological glitch straight out of a medical drama. They want Lois to be their surrogate. Peter's disappointment is so palpable you could bottle it and sell it as cologne called Crushed Dreams. The whole Griffin family weighs in with their typical dysfunction. Meg claims she could do it after that weird Count Von Count dating flashback that counts her nipples and immediately bails. Stewie compares Lois's uterus to a Red Roof Inn, which honestly tracks for his level of commentary. Lois agrees to carry the baby despite Peter throwing every objection at the wall to see what sticks. She gets the embryo implantation done via blow dart, because this show operates on cartoon logic, where medical procedures involve South American tribesmen with weapons. The pregnancy test comes back positive. Peter goes full sabotage mode. He hires 1980s breakdancers to perform on her stomach to save a rec center. He breaks out an Acme miscarriage kit like he's Wile E. Coyote trying to stop a baby instead of a roadrunner. He challenges Lois to a bleach drinking contest. The man becomes a one-person pregnancy termination task force. Then the news drops that Naomi and Dale died in a car crash. The same news segment announces Dale won the lottery right before mentioning he's dead, which is peak Family Guy dark comedy timing. Suddenly, Lois is pregnant with a dead couple's baby, facing medical bills she can't afford, carrying a child with no parents waiting at the finish line. The family suggests abortion. Peter agrees immediately because apparently his principles have the consistency of cafeteria Jell-O. Lois decides to visit a family planning clinic to explore options. At the clinic, Peter gets intercepted by protesters showing him an anti-abortion propaganda video. The video is so absurdly over the top it makes after-school specials look subtle. Ziggy the Zygote appears as a cute mascot with tiny arms for hugging. The video claims abortion killed the guy who would have stopped Hitler, the fourth stooge. Apparently there were supposed to be 4 of them, and Osama bin Laden's peace-loving older brother. Peter gets completely radicalized in approximately 90 seconds. He bursts into the clinic mid-procedure and physically stops Lois from having the abortion, screaming about saving unborn babies like he's the world's least qualified superhero. Back home, Brian tries to talk sense into Peter using actual logic. Peter declares all living things sacred while simultaneously saying once babies exit the vagina, they can fend for themselves. The hypocrisy is so thick you could spread it on toast. Lois and Peter have a massive screaming match about bodily autonomy, rape exceptions, incest, endangered mothers, and disabled fetuses. Peter suggests naming a baby with no arms and legs, Matt, as in doormat, because Family Guy gonna Family Guy. Lois threatens to go back to the clinic. Peter threatens to blow up the clinic. Brian points out that killing doctors to prove killing is wrong makes zero logical sense. Peter's brain briefly short-circuits trying to process that contradiction. The episode ends with Lois and Peter having a long talk upstairs about making a decision together. They come back down and Peter gives this whole speech about how babies are expensive and exhausting, but worth it for one more person to love, one more voice in the back seat, one more Griffin to share the world with. The music swells. The moment feels genuinely touching and sincere. Then hard cut to Peter saying, "We have the abortion." Roll credits. Fox looked at this episode and said, "Absolutely not. It never aired on broadcast television in the United States." The network that regularly shows Peter fighting a giant chicken for 5-minute stretches drew the line at tackling abortion with any real nuance. The episode did air internationally and later appeared on streaming. The controversy around abortion in America is so nuclear that even an animated comedy couldn't touch it without getting benched. The episode tries to present both sides of the debate through Lois and Peter's argument, showing the genuine moral complexity of the issue. That balanced approach somehow made it more controversial, because taking no clear side meant potentially offending everyone equally. The episode lives in this weird banned limbo where it exists and doesn't exist simultaneously. You can find it if you look, but it never got the mainstream broadcast treatment. It's Family Guy's radioactive stepchild, locked in the vault next to all those episodes of other shows that networks wish they could memory hole. The whole thing proves that American television will show you graphic violence, crude sexual humor, and Peter Griffin's bare ass on a regular basis, but a genuine conversation about reproductive rights, that's where the line gets drawn in Sharpie. The episode forces viewers to sit with uncomfortable questions about bodily autonomy, religious belief, and who gets to make decisions about pregnancy. 20 years later, those questions are somehow even more relevant than when the episode was made, which probably says something depressing about progress, or the lack thereof. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one's even more chaotic. In episode Road to the North Pole, Stewie gets blown off by Mall Santa and decides to travel to the North Pole to kill him, dragging Brian along on a journey that reveals Santa Claus is real but dying from overwork. The North Pole Workshop is a toxic nightmare staffed by inbred mutant elves, and Christmas has become an unsustainable horror show. The episode is narrated by Ron McFarlane, Seth's father, and genuinely qualifies as one of the darkest things Family Guy ever produced. The town of Quahog prepares for Christmas with elaborate musical numbers about excessive wish lists. Peter wants Jessica Biel and Megan Fox wearing nothing but socks. Lois wants a week in Mexico with black guys and cocaine. Quagmire wants Japanese girls to choke him until he faints. The Christmas demands are absurd and endless. Brian suggests this seems excessive. Peter dismisses him because Christmas is about getting. Stewie waits in line at the mall to see Santa. They try cutting in with Quagmire, who's there with his niece Abby. Brian mistakes Abby for a boy. Quagmire reveals her hair is short from chemotherapy. Brian's comment sends Abby to the ICU with a turn for the worse. When it's finally Stewie's turn, Mall Santa announces he's done for the day. Stewie is furious. He demands Brian drive him to the real North Pole to kill Santa Claus for disrespecting him. They drive north, but arrive at a cheap amusement park with black teenagers selling merchandise. Stewie rejects this as fake. Brian tries convincing Stewie to write a Christmas list. Stewie reveals he's going to kill Santa Claus. After hijacking a truck and accidentally firing a flare gun that destroys Brian's car, Brian admits the truth. Santa doesn't exist. Stewie refuses to believe this and compares it to saying SpongeBob and Curious George aren't real. Brian offers a deal. If Santa isn't at the North Pole, Stewie takes Lois's middle-of-the-night feeding shift. Brian accepts immediately. Their car breaks down in Canada. A drunk Canadian offers his snowmobile, money, and leg. They take everything to observe Canadian customs. They arrive at the actual North Pole. The facility looks like Bridgeport, Connecticut, abandoned buildings, shattered glass, boarded up windows. Santa answers the door. Stewie announces he's going to kill him. Santa begs for death. He wants to be put out of his misery. Santa explains the horror. The world's population kept growing. Kids wanted more toys, fancier toys. They used to make wooden choo-choos and rag dolls. Now he has orders for millions of iPods. The workshop produces toxic waste. The toxins are killing everyone, along with the inbreeding. Santa started with one family of magic elves. Now they're a sickly race of mutated genetic disasters. At least 60% are born blind. The workload destroys them. Near the end, they walk into the snow and die. The reindeer eat them, which turn the reindeer into wild feral creatures with bloodlust for elf flesh. What god would allow this horror show? Santa and the elves sing about how Christmas is killing them. The workload is draining them. Fingers bleed. Someone just peed. The place is like Iraq. Santa looks 28, but he's ancient. It's a requiem, not a celebration. A doctor says if Santa goes out for Christmas Eve deliveries, he'll die. Stewie and Brian volunteer to deliver presents. They prepare the sleigh. The reindeer won't move until they're given elf flesh. An elf wanders by in a daze. They reluctantly feed him to the reindeer. They arrive at their first house. Brian crashes the sleigh into the yard. They realize the presents are still outside. Brian breaks a window to get back in. Stewie criticizes Brian's present arrangement. Brian eats an entire cookie instead of taking one bite. They argue. The homeowner discovers them. Stewie knocks him out with a baseball bat. His daughter comes downstairs. They panic. The mother comes down. They knock her out and duct tape the whole family. They realize they're in the wrong house. The alarm goes off. They've been at one house for 90 minutes. There are 2 apartment buildings on this block alone. No wonder Santa lost his mind. They flee, abandoning the reindeer who are eating each other. Christmas morning arrives with no presents. Brian brings Santa to Quahog and broadcasts on Channel 5 News. He explains Santa is real but sick and dying from years of greed. The workload has overwhelmed him. If everyone can ask for only one Christmas present per year, there may be hope. Otherwise, Christmas must be given up altogether. The town agrees. 1 gift per year is enough. The episode ends with everyone committing to living with less. The inbred blind elves walking into the snow to die. The cannibalistic reindeer. The toxic waste. Santa begging for death. These images qualify as genuinely disturbing. The home invasion where they assault a family and duct tape children is played for horror. The whole thing suggests Christmas in its current form cannot continue without destroying everyone involved. The solution requires collective sacrifice, which feels revolutionary for a show usually celebrating excess. Now let's move on to the next episode, and things only get wilder from here. In episode Lego My Mego, Meg gets kidnapped by human traffickers in Paris. Brian and Stewie mount a rescue mission involving parkour deaths and auction infiltration, and they successfully save her from marrying an Arabian prince who actually wanted to treat her well. The whole thing parodies Taken, while reinforcing that Meg remains the family's least valued member even when her life is in actual danger. Meg endures another humiliating day at James Woods High. In gym class, Connie picks teams for dodgeball and selects everyone except Meg. The teacher makes everyone kiss her at the end of class as a goodbye ritual. Meg tells her friend Ruth she can't take another semester at this school. Ruth mentions she's going to Paris for a semester through a school program. Her aunt has a free apartment they can use. Meg decides to join her using money saved from part-time jobs. Peter struggles saying goodbye, attempting good B instead of goodbye. Stewie tells Meg to get laid. They arrive in Paris. A suspicious man with no luggage offers to share a cab, then immediately calls someone about fresh arrivals, rating them a 3 out of 10. At the apartment, Meg calls Peter to confirm she arrived safely. Mid-conversation, men break in and kidnap Ruth. Meg panics as they come for her. Peter gives her terrible advice. Panic, pay no attention to detail, let your mind race, take short rapid breaths, then hide under the bed with feet sticking out. Meg screams. A man picks up the phone and says, Drakkar Noir in a deep menacing voice before hanging up. Peter goes to the police. They explain the men are likely part of a sophisticated human smuggling network. If Meg isn't found within 96 hours, she's gone forever. The police can't begin searching until she's been missing 96 hours. Peter delivers a terrible Taken parody monologue about having a particular lack of skills and offering $2 or a Casio wristwatch. Brian decides they must rescue Meg themselves. Stewie has the technology to help. Brian tries putting the flight on Stewie's credit card, leading to an argument about Jersey Boys and Foxwoods being paid back. In Paris, they check the apartment for clues. Stewie reveals he records all phone calls in and out of the Griffin house, then plays an embarrassing recording of Brian canceling his Captain Stabbin subscription, a guy doing women on a boat in a captain's hat. They use Google Earth to identify the man who met Meg at the airport. They find him, but he escapes using parkour. He dies after running into traffic, hitting himself with a chateau. His wallet contains an address. They pose as Eastern European cologne salesmen with voice recognition software to match Drakkar Noir to the recording. After testing multiple men, they find their target. They raid the location, finding girls held upstairs. One girl gives Brian Meg's hat. She reveals Meg was taken to Wednesday night auctions. A weird night, according to Stewie. They miss the courtesy shuttle but catch the next one 20 minutes later after Stewie works out. At the auction, Stewie disguises himself as a girl and gets entered. He dances to California Girls by Katy Perry. Someone bids $500,000. Stewie doesn't have money. They get caught. Meg goes up for auction to the zonk music from Let's Make a Deal. They escape, chase her car using car chase GPS, giving absurd directions, and board the yacht holding her. They discover Meg wasn't bought as a slave, but as a bride for Faisal, the heir to an Arabian throne. He proposes properly. offering to fly her home on the private jet if she refuses, or spend the rest of his days making her wishes come true if she accepts. Meg says yes. Stewie screams no, and presumably stops the wedding. Meg wakes up in a French hospital with no memory. Ruth had her tongue ripped out. Peter jokes about Meg's mail, but admits she didn't get any. The episode suggests Meg's best romantic option involved being kidnapped into forced marriage, which says everything about how the show views her prospects. Stewie actively prevents Meg from escaping her terrible life, dragging her back to Quahog where nobody values her. The rescue mission succeeds, but whether Meg benefits remains questionable. Family Guy treats even human trafficking as another opportunity to reinforce Meg's status as the family punching bag who can't catch a break even when Arabian royalty wants to treat her well. Now let's move on to the next episode. And trust me, it gets messier. And if you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to our channel. Chris Griffin's evil monkey turns out to be a depressed, divorced guy living in the closet after losing everything. Stewie becomes obsessed with Hannah Montana and discovers she's a Disney-engineered android. Peter and Chris fight over the monkey becoming Chris's new father figure. And everything culminates with giant robot Miley Cyrus destroying Quahog like a tween pop star version of King Kong. The episode manages to parody Disney Channel programming, while simultaneously being more unhinged than anything Disney would ever produce, which sets the bar somewhere around concerningly high. Chris comes home with another D on his science test. Lois asks Peter to help with homework. Peter declines because that sounds worse than visiting a failing mall where you shop at stores near dead fountains with garbage and meet under the glue outline of where the Limited used to exist. Chris explains he can't study because the evil monkey living in his closet keeps scaring him. Everyone dismisses this as imaginary friend nonsense from a high schooler who should know better. Chris sets up a video camera to prove the monkey's existence. He captures nothing. He sets a trap. Success. The family discovers Chris was right all along about the closet-dwelling primate. The monkey explains his backstory while tied to a chair. He came home from work one day and found his wife cheating with another monkey. The divorce sent him into deep depression, costing him his job. Financial ruin meant losing the house. He moved into Chris's closet temporarily until getting back on his feet. 9 years passed. The scary face happens when he's thinking. The pointing was a tempting conversation. The trembling comes from copper deficiency. Chris refuses to accept these explanations because being terrorized for years creates trust issues that reasonable explanations can't immediately fix, which honestly tracks for anyone who spent their formative years fearing closet-based threats. Stewie watches Hannah Montana and becomes obsessed. He cries, begging Brian to help get concert tickets. Brian caves to the emotional manipulation. They sneak backstage. Brian claims Stewie has cancer, with a football-sized brain tumor, to gain sympathy access. Miley Cyrus welcomes them, because she won't throw out a dying baby fan. Stewie and Miley bond. They write a song together about friendship being the best thing ever, except for best friendship, which qualifies as a lot better. The duet happens with full production value because Disney musical numbers apparently manifest automatically whenever anyone with a recording contract starts singing. The monkey helps Chris with homework by writing his book report about the slavery allegory in Curious George. Chris gets an A. The monkey takes Chris to father-son events. They attend barbecues together. Peter feels replaced as Chris's dad. The resentment builds. Chris calls Peter the worst dad in the world. Peter says he hates Chris too. The family breakfast becomes passive-aggressive message, relay through Lois and Meg. Peter tries making Chris look bad at school by announcing he's gay and welcoming everyone to be gay together. This backfires when someone actually wants to be gay with Peter. Peter gets his head stuck in logs trying to win a free hat, which he considers a victory despite the head trauma. Stewie accidentally triggers Miley's control panel while fixing her shirt tag. She transforms into a rampaging android destroyer. Brian and Stewie run for their lives. Giant robot Miley Cyrus attacks Quahog like Godzilla with better hair and worse programming. The monkey tries talking her down. She roars and continues destroying everything. Peter and Quagmire take a biplane to fight the pop star kaiju. They shoot her while laughing and giggitying in rhythm with the machine gun fire because of course they do. The airplane brings her down. Brian claims Beauty killed the Beast in a King Kong reference that lands somewhere between clever and deeply inappropriate. The monkey reconciles Peter and Chris by forcing them into the same room during the android rampage. Peter admits he could make more time for his son. Chris acknowledges Peter tries occasionally. The father-son relationship repairs through exposure to giant robot destruction, which honestly beats family therapy for entertainment value if nothing else. The monkey announces his work is done. He's moving on to help other families in need. Chris wants him to stay. The monkey explains that chapter of his life ended. He goes where he's needed. The final scene shows him appearing in Tom Tucker's son's closet, while Tom declares he simply does not care about evil monkey reports. The episode redeems a 9-year running gag about Chris being terrorized by revealing the monkey suffered from divorce, depression, and homelessness, while Chris's family ignored obvious cries for help. Stewie's obsession with tween pop stars gets explained through celebrity android conspiracy theories. Peter learns to appreciate Chris through aerial combat against malfunctioning Disney technology. The whole thing suggests that sometimes family bonding requires fighting giant robots together, which might actually qualify as decent parenting advice, depending on your perspective and robot availability. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one goes off the rails fast. Peter Griffin gets hired at the Trump White House in an episode that became the animated equivalent of a milk carton left in the sun during summer vacation. The family moves to Washington, D.C. Trump sexually assaults Meg. Peter quits and brawls with the president across various national landmarks, and they return to Quahog having accomplished absolutely nothing, according to Brian's brutally honest closing narration. The episode aired in January 2019 while Trump remained in office, proving that satirizing current politics through animation with 6-month production timelines feels about as smart as bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife takes half a year to arrive and the fight already ended. The Griffin family relocates to the nation's capital because Peter landed a job at the White House. His official responsibilities include entering rooms before Trump to test for static electricity. Peter touches a doorknob, gets electrocuted like a cartoon character sticking a fork in an outlet, and Trump walks in safely afterward. This passes for gainful employment in the Trump administration, apparently. The family unpacks in their new DC residence. Stewie immediately calls dibs on the bedroom where an intern got murdered. Chris complains he wanted that room. Lois solves the argument by revealing an intern has been murdered in each bedroom, which somehow makes everything okay. The real estate market in DC works differently than other cities, apparently. Meg protests leaving Quahog because tomorrow is scoliosis spine check day, the one day annually she gets physically touched by another human being. Lois insists they need to support Peter's great new opportunity because that's what families do, even when the opportunity involves working for, well, you know. They attend a fancy White House party where the entire gathering looks like someone ordered corruption from Amazon Prime and got same-day delivery. Multiple guests mistake Meg for Chris Christie. Lois apologizes that everyone thinks Meg qualifies as a historically unpopular fatso from New Jersey, which ranks among the most devastating insults in the show's history, and that's saying something. Brian announces he wrote the liberal jokes for the evening, then proceeds to shout about erectile dysfunction during a CNN panel segment where he's literally the loudest person in an overcrowded group of screaming pundits. His contributions to political discourse consist entirely of yelling about impotence problems, meditation making him fall asleep, spending $3,000 on a sandals vacation to fix his broken penis, and being limp on a lazy river. His wife realizes mid-argument that's why they went to sandals in the first place. Imagine being the closed captioning stenographer assigned to that segment. Peter mingles with a suspicious Russian character, asking for Gmail passwords. Peter provides his login credentials because he trusts fellow Americans, proving once again that Peter Griffin's intelligence level sits somewhere between a goldfish and a particularly dim hamster. Meg meets Ivanka Trump, who bonds with her over having fat idiot dads who once had hit television shows and wore out their welcomes over time. The self-awareness here cuts deeper than a Hot Topic regular's eyeliner. Ivanka offers Meg a makeover using her lifestyle brand designed to represent what poor people imagine rich people would wear. The transformation works. Meg looks beautiful by DC standards, which admittedly sets the bar somewhere around ankle height. Ivanka introduces Meg to Trump. He immediately sexually assaults her. Meg tells the family the next day. Peter refuses to believe his boss would grab a woman inappropriately, despite Trump literally admitting to this exact behavior on tape that the entire world heard. Peter's selective memory rivals someone trying to forget they watched the last season of Game of Thrones. Peter spent a whole day building this career. He won't throw away one day's worth of work based on his daughter's accusations. His priorities make about as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. Brian witnesses Trump assaulting Meg and confirms her story. Peter confronts Trump by comparing presidential behavior to his own insulting tendencies on Family Guy. Trump argues that if Peter Griffin gets to be a jerk constantly on television, why can't the president behave the same way? The logic actually lands better than expected, which says something deeply concerning about both characters. Peter argues the crucial difference. Family Guy airs on television where viewers can change the channel, while Trump functions as president, appearing everywhere constantly. Peter calls Trump cash poor and says that's why he won't release tax returns. Trump takes extreme offense to this financial assessment. They fight across Washington, D.C. in a sequence that looks like someone crossed a Looney Tunes cartoon with C-SPAN coverage. The battle includes the Washington Monument, various federal buildings, and Air Force One. Peter acquires a sillier plane because, of course he does. Justin Trudeau kayaks past, offering assistance. Everyone agrees Putin ranks as the best, and Canada's hunky Prime Minister leaves to do awesome Canada stuff. Peter and Trump punch each other extensively across national monuments until they fall from the Washington Monument together. A giant inflatable Trump balloon breaks their fall. Trudeau placed it there earlier because Canadian politicians apparently have nothing better to do than prevent American cartoon characters from dying. The family returns to Quahog. Brian's closing narration admits they had fun this week and changed 0 minds, which might be the most honest moment in Family Guy history. He mentions the Steele dossier about getting peed on and Trump endorsing a pedophile for Senate, noting these facts didn't fit tonight's narrative but shouldn't be forgotten. The episode ends with the family announcing they're very frightened, which tracks considering they just spent 20 minutes animated satirical commentary that aged worse than room temperature sushi, within approximately 6 weeks of airing. The whole thing proves that political satire through animation with long production cycles makes about as much sense as trying to live tweet a carrier pigeon conversation. Now let's move on to the next episode, and it somehow gets crazier. In episode Seahorse Seashell Party, Hurricane Flozell traps the Griffin family indoors for 36 hours. Brian decides to make the experience tolerable by eating psychedelic mushrooms. Meg decides to make the experience memorable by finally telling her family exactly what she thinks of them. One of these decisions ends with terrifying hallucinations. The other ends with the family briefly achieving self-awareness before immediately rejecting it like a bad organ transplant. The episode opens with a hurricane warning, forcing everyone to hunker down together. The TV satellite goes out immediately, which means the Griffins have to actually interact with each other for an extended period. This is like forcing people who communicate exclusively through Yelp reviews to have an actual conversation. Brian reveals to Stewie that he's planning to trip on mushrooms to pass the time. Stewie acts incredibly cool about it. He absolutely is not cool about it, and claims all his friends do drugs around him constantly because he's so non-judgmental. The level of overcompensation could power a small city. The family attempts normal activities like charades. Peter ruins it by talking through the entire game and immediately guessing Fletch correctly anyway. Then Peter entertains everyone with an extended session of dad noises that includes approximately 17 different types of throat clearing, groaning, and bodily functions. It's performance art if performance art could get you a prescription for acid reflux medication. The family sits through Finger Bang, the pointing game, Calm Down, which Meg tries to join before getting immediately shut down. Nobody wants to get finger banged by Meg, apparently. The casual cruelty is so normalized, it barely registers as an insult anymore. Brian's mushroom trip spirals into absolute nightmare territory. He starts hallucinating that he needs to cut off his ear to prevent World War II. Van Gogh logic meets time travel delusions. Stewie tries to calm him down with a soothing voice that transforms into demonic nightmare fuel. Brian experiences a full horror movie in his own mind, featuring evil versions of the entire family. Lois wants to make out. Meg appears as a cockroach creature. Peter shows up as various monsters. The whole sequence plays like if Hieronymus Bosch painted a bad acid trip while watching Sesame Street. Stewie stays by Brian's side the entire time, like the world's most loyal trip sitter, eventually getting Brian downstairs to lap water directly from a bowl on the floor like the dog he is. Meanwhile, upstairs, Meg reaches her breaking point. The family suggests a sing-along. Peter hums the Indiana Jones chase music from The Last Crusade on his phone. Meg cracks open a soda can, interrupting the performance. Peter snaps at her for being annoying. That's the trigger. Meg has spent 17 years absorbing abuse from these people, and a soda can pop becomes the final straw. She fires back, asking if Peter's obnoxious humming was any better. Chris tells her to shut up. Meg refuses. The dam breaks. Meg goes scorched earth on the entire family with surgical precision. She starts with Chris, her own brother, who constantly gangs up on her. She asks how he'd feel if she called him a fat, zitty loser who smells like an old woman with birds for pets. Chris has no response because the description is devastatingly accurate. She demands basic decency from him, asking why he can't show her kindness instead of jumping on the "let's get Meg family" bandwagon every single time. The metaphor lands because everyone knows exactly what bandwagon she's talking about. Then Meg pivots to Lois with the kind of verbal precision usually reserved for legal depositions. She lists every single one of Lois's past mistakes: the shoplifting, the drug addiction, the porn career, sleeping with Gene Simmons and Bill Clinton. That's quite the guest list for someone who now acts morally superior to her teenage daughter. Meg points out the hypocrisy of someone with that track record constantly pointing out Meg's shortcomings. Lois tries to deflect by saying those experiences made her a better person. Meg shuts that down immediately. She explains that from birth, she had to trust Lois. She had no choice. She needed protection, guidance, help navigating the vulnerable journey of becoming a person. Lois provided none of those things. Instead, Lois took a child's trust and spent 17 years destroying it. Meg delivers the killing blow. When she turns 18, she doesn't know if she ever wants to see Lois again. Lois immediately breaks down crying and admits everything Meg said is true. She confesses to being a terrible mother with no excuse, driven by some horrible compulsion to point out Meg's faults. The emotional breakthrough lasts approximately 45 seconds before Meg turns her attention to Peter. Peter thinks he's safe, hanging back and watching the drama unfold. He makes a Harry Potter joke about Meg's glasses. Wrong move. Meg calls him a selfish, irresponsible father with no education and no interests who does reckless things without regard for anyone else. She points out that he shoves her face in his butt and farts on it. If anyone from the outside world saw how he treats her, he'd be in jail. She calls him a fat, lazy, abusive, blue-collar Irish Catholic dad who drinks too much and barely supports his family. He's lived half his life with nothing to show for it except his kids, who are a complete disaster. She calls him a total embarrassment and a waste of a man. The family immediately fractures. Peter and Lois start fighting. Chris joins in, complaining about Lois's cooking. Lois fires back about emptying farts out of Chris's pockets during laundry, which is both disgusting and raises questions about Chris's personal habits. They argue about Brussels sprouts causing Irish bar fights in Chris's digestive system. Chris wants Wonder Bread like Bonnie gives Joe. The whole thing devolves into everyone screaming at each other about Dannon yogurts and faked orgasms. Peter runs away to hide in the closet with the shoes because he doesn't deserve better. The Griffin family civil war is in full effect. Meg finds Brian post-trip and confides in him. She meant everything she said, but watching the family turn on each other like wolves makes her wonder something troubling. Maybe this family can't survive without a lightning rod to absorb all the dysfunction. Maybe if she feels bad, they don't have to. Brian calls this incredibly noble and mature. He says she might be the strongest person in the house. Armed with this validation, Meg makes her choice. She takes it all back. Every word. She tells Lois she's an amazing mother, Chris is an outstanding brother, Peter doesn't deserve to feel bad, none of them did anything wrong. She took her problems out on them unfairly. The family immediately accepts this explanation because it requires zero self-reflection on their part. Peter says it makes sense because he thought it was weird that he was a bad dad. The cognitive dissonance is strong with this one. Lois asks how Meg could put them through that ordeal. Chris calls her a bleeped-out bitch. Meg agrees. Peace is restored. The family's dysfunction gets swept back under the rug where it lives rent-free. The episode ends with Stewie breaking the fourth wall to deliver a PSA about drugs, directing viewers to their local library, where there's probably a guy behind the desk who sells them. The whole thing is a masterclass in how families maintain dysfunctional equilibrium by designating one person as the emotional punching bag. Meg achieves clarity, speaks her truth, watches everything fall apart, and chooses to go back to being the family scapegoat because apparently someone has to do it. The show basically confirms that Meg's role as the family's abuse absorber is essential to keeping the Griffins from completely destroying each other. The hurricane passes, the mushroom trip ends, the family returns to normal. Meg remains the lightning rod. Nothing fundamentally changes, except now viewers know Meg is fully aware of her role and chooses to maintain it anyway. That's either the saddest or most mature thing Family Guy has ever depicted, and honestly, both interpretations work. The episode proves you can have a moment of brutal honesty in a dysfunctional family, but actually maintaining that honesty requires more strength than anyone involved possesses. So, back to the status quo, where Meg gets verbally destroyed and everyone pretends that's just how families work. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and the madness only gets bigger. And remember to subscribe to our channel. Now let's continue where we left off. In episode Quagmire's Dad, Family Guy tackles transgender identity with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to a china shop. Quagmire's decorated war hero father comes to town for a Navy ball, then transitions to female and sleeps with Brian, who vomits for 30 seconds straight on screen. The whole thing plays like someone took a very special episode and threw it into a blender with shock comedy set to maximum. Brian announces he's leaving for a seminar about creating web-based internet series. The family treats his departure like he's wandering off to die in the woods. Peter reminds Brian that the Griffin surname is a courtesy with zero legal standing. They threaten him with a can of pennies when he protests. Emotional support skills in the Griffin family remain at rock bottom. Quagmire bursts in with news. His father, Lieutenant Commander Dan Quagmire, is visiting for a Navy ball honoring his Vietnam service. Quagmire hypes up his dad as the ultimate ladies' man. Dan arrives with an entrance choreographed to "These boots are made for walking," literally dancing into the house. Peter immediately notices Dan orders a Cosmopolitan. The stereotypical gay radar starts pinging louder than a submarine's sonar. Dan tells war stories about getting the perfect haircut, wearing a helmet that ruins it, and describing the sky as majestic orange, while discussing proper short-sleeve weather to avoid perspiration. Peter's phone buzzes. The text reads, "Dan is super gay." Dan joins a Stitchin' and Bitch club, dances extensively, shows stereotypically feminine mannerisms. Quagmire interprets all of this as his hilarious, fun-loving father being authentic. Peter confronts Quagmire about his father's sexuality. Quagmire refuses to see it, accusing Peter of jealousy. At the Navy ball, military veterans share stories about serving with Dan. Every single story contains double entendres about seamen, taking loads, stroking privates, and other increasingly suggestive phrases. One veteran mentions Dan had the best penis in the military, apparently referring to a Navy Excellence in Navigation award. Quagmire finally snaps and asks his father directly if he's gay. Dan denies it, then drops the bombshell. He's a woman trapped in a man's body and plans to have gender confirmation surgery while in Quahog. Peter's response is peak Peter, "Just be gay." Quagmire tries explaining the difference. Peter and Joe keep calling it gay anyway because nuance refuses to penetrate their skulls. The conversation descends into confusion about whether Dan wants to be a lesbian. No, he'd date men, which they still call gay. Quagmire asks Peter to come for moral support at the surgery. Peter agrees on the condition that anything removed gets brought home for Brian. Doctor. Hartman emerges saying he is doing poorly, then announces she's gonna be just fine. Dan comes out as Ida, dancing to Walking on Sunshine. The surgical recovery time is apparently measured in minutes rather than weeks. The Griffin family invites Quagmire and Ida over for dinner. Ida arrives with a crumble dessert. Lois immediately tells someone to throw it in the outside garbage. Peter asks whether Ida misses having a penis. Ida explains the procedure involves inverting existing anatomy. The dinner becomes a minefield of social faux pas, with everyone stepping on every mine. Ida and Lois bond over clothing. Meg asks who performed Ida's procedure. Peter declares Meg burned her last friend in the room. Quagmire storms out, unable to handle watching his father discuss decorating after years of bragging about what a war hero he was. Quagmire struggles with what to call his father. Dad? Other mother? Friend who pees sitting down but can palm a basketball? Ida and Quagmire argue. Ida explains she'd been unhappy for years. The choice was simple: be happy or stay miserable. Quagmire accuses her of choosing happiness at his expense. Brian returns from his seminar thrilled about meeting an incredible woman at the Marriott Hotel bar. He shows Peter and Lois a photo. They recognize Ida and laugh uncontrollably. Brian insists they're jealous. The dramatic irony is so thick you could spread it on toast. Brian has zero idea he slept with Quagmire's newly transitioned father. Stewie mentions Quagmire's father became a woman. Brian finds this hysterical. He and Stewie laugh about how difficult relationships must be for transgender people. Brian calls it a train wreck down there and an absolute casserole of nonsense. The transphobic commentary flows freely from the character who prides himself on being progressive. The hypocrisy is the point. Brian's liberalism extends exactly as far as things that don't personally affect him. Stewie mentions Ida is staying at the Marriott. Brian mentions he was just there. Stewie asks what they call her now. The name is Ida. Brian's face changes. The realization crashes through his skull. He starts retching. Stewie watches as Brian vomits continuously for 30 seconds of screen time. The sound design commits fully. Brian screams he had sex with her. He yells about how people are supposed to notify the neighborhood when they move, comparing transgender people to registered offenders. The joke treats Brian sleeping with a transgender woman as the ultimate horror scenario. The vomiting goes on so long it becomes almost abstract. Meanwhile, Quagmire reconciles with Ida. He apologizes for his selfishness. The moment turns genuinely touching. Then Ida reveals she met someone amazing. Quagmire asks for his name. Ida's phone autocorrect reveals it's Brian. Quagmire's face transforms from joy to pure rage in 0.5 seconds. Quagmire storms to the Griffin house screaming for Brian. He drags Brian out and beats him viciously in the front yard. He threatens to blow Brian's head off if he comes near his house. Brian lies broken and bleeding. Quagmire delivers the final line, "I fucked your dad." The episode ends with Brian's humiliation complete. No resolution, no lessons learned. The episode generated massive controversy for the extended vomiting sequence, suggesting sleeping with a transgender woman is inherently disgusting. Critics called it transphobic. Defenders argued it satirized Brian's hypocrisy. The episode treats Ida's transition with moments of genuine sensitivity through Quagmire's acceptance arc, then undercuts everything with Brian's extreme disgust reaction played for shock laughs. The whole thing encapsulates Family Guy's approach. Tackle the subject directly, include emotional beats, then go for maximum shock regardless of consequences. The episode aired in 2010 when conversations about transgender rights were entering mainstream discourse. The show jumped in with both feet, landed awkwardly, and generated think pieces for months. The Brian vomiting scene became infamous, either brilliantly exposing liberal hypocrisy or reinforcing harmful stereotypes depending on your perspective. Now let's move on to the next episode, and the chaos level jumps again. In episode Turban Cowboy, Peter tackles the crushing boredom of suburban life by taking up skydiving, which somehow leads to him accidentally joining a terrorist sleeper cell planning to blow up a bridge. The episode aired in 2013, more than a decade after September 11th, and Family Guy decided the statute of limitations on terrorism jokes had officially expired. The network disagreed. The whole thing became peak post-9/11 controversy, proving that some topics remain radioactive no matter how much time passes. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire realize they've become pathetically dull. Peter plans to spend his weekend sitting in the front yard with a rake waving at cars. Quagmire found a hole in his fence he wants to stick stuff through. These are their recreational activities. The realization that they've become boring, middle-aged suburban stereotypes hits them like a freight train, loaded with sadness. Joe suggests they do something exciting. Peter offers two options: rob a mafia poker game or go skydiving. The delivery makes it clear which one Peter thinks is the good idea. They choose skydiving. The skydiving sequence features Harrison Ford yelling, "Get off my plane," repeatedly because Air Force One references are apparently timeless. Peter becomes immediately addicted to the adrenaline rush. He starts skydiving constantly, destroying half the neighborhood in the process. Parachutes choke up the washing machine. Peter crashes through roofs, lands on cars, creates general mayhem across Quahog. Lois begs him to stop before he seriously hurts himself. Peter refuses. Skydiving defines his entire personality now, which tracks for someone whose previous identity revolved around television and chicken fights. Peter's luck runs out when he crashes and gets impaled on the replica Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas. He initially thinks he's in Paris until someone calls him a douchebag. He ends up in the hospital with a significant injury. While recovering, he meets Mahmoud, a Muslim man wearing a traditional prayer cap. Peter admits he's scared of the hat because he's never seen one before. Stunning self-awareness from someone who usually lacks all introspection. Mahmoud explains it's a taqiyya. They bond over Muslim Looney Tunes, where Porky Pig stutters about being dirty and untouchable as a pig. The friendship forms instantly over shared appreciation for culturally specific cartoon variations. Peter invites Mahmoud to hang out with Joe, Quagmire, and Brian. The guys immediately distrust him. Mahmoud orders ginger ale instead of alcohol. He doesn't look at attractive women because he's married. He clips his cell phone to his belt, like someone important. The racism is subtle, but present. Peter calls them out for post-9/11 prejudice. Brian supports Peter's open-mindedness. Brian loves opportunities to demonstrate his progressive credentials. Peter defends cultural differences by noting that every group has quirks. Italian guys talk with their hands, Irish guys drink, and black guys change their shirts mid-story. The show commits to the bit, with a full demonstration of this oddly specific stereotype. Peter starts spending more time at Mahmoud's hookah lounge. He discovers Muslim culture includes obedient wives who do whatever their husbands say. Mahmoud demonstrates by having his wife pick up Peter's dry cleaning without question. Peter converts to Islam immediately. The appeal is entirely superficial. Cool hat, obedient wife, and shouting Admiral Akbar. He means Allahu Akbar, but gets it wrong because Peter Griffin. He learns to ululate by singing La Bamba, without saying the La Bamba part. He starts shopping at the bazaar and returns with 6 cobras, silk, a ram's horn, and 20 bags of dates instead of the cereal and bread Lois requested. Mahmoud invites Peter to meet some friends. The scene cuts to a secret basement meeting. Peter walks in, asking if anyone objects to him, picking his nose with a dagger. The men test Peter's loyalty by asking whether Hulk Hogan or the Iron Sheik is better. Peter chooses the Iron Sheik. He passes. Then they casually discuss their plan to blow up the Quahog Bridge. Peter plays with toy cars making explosion noises, completely oblivious to the serious terrorism discussion happening around him. Joe, Quagmire, and Brian confront Peter about joining a terrorist sleeper cell. Peter defends Mahmoud, mentioning that Mahmoud knew 19 guys who died on 9/11. The dark joke about the actual terrorists flies right over Peter's head. Joe points out the obvious: meeting in secret, creating cover stories, planning attacks. Peter finally accepts the truth. Brian delivers a speech about how these few extremists don't represent all Muslims, noting that every ethnic group has dangerous individuals. The show attempts nuance while simultaneously making the entire premise a joke. Joe convinces Peter to go undercover wearing a wire to find out their next plan. Peter agrees to be a hero. At the next meeting, the terrorists reveal they plan to blow up the Quahog Bridge during rush hour. They need Peter to drive because an American behind the wheel will arouse less suspicion at the toll plaza. Peter asks them to repeat everything because he had an itch near his microphone. The terrorists discover the wire immediately. They force Peter to drive the bomb van right now, moving up the timeline. Peter drives toward the bridge with Mahmoud holding him at gunpoint. He delivers a patriotic speech about America being the land where Jenny McCarthy has a role in childhood vaccination debates, where people can walk into any IHOP and see fights, where Twitter users spell "there" however they want. The speech is simultaneously loving and critical of America's absurdities. Mahmoud remains unmoved. Joe and the police arrive. Mahmoud gets arrested. 30 terrorists go to jail. Every middle-class Arab in Quahog is now under suspicion. The show acknowledges the racial profiling consequences while doing nothing to condemn it. The episode generated massive backlash. The timing coincided with the Boston Marathon bombing, which happened the month it aired. Fox pulled the episode from rotation temporarily. Critics called it insensitive and Islamophobic. The portrayal of Muslim characters as terrorists reinforced harmful stereotypes. The show's defense was that it mocked Peter's ignorance and showed Brian defending Muslims as a diverse group. The counter-argument was that depicting an actual terrorist cell filled with Muslim characters undermined any attempted progressive messaging. The episode tried having it both ways, making terrorism jokes while also condemning prejudice. The execution landed somewhere between tone-deaf and deliberately provocative, depending on who you ask. The whole thing proved that some comedy topics remain explosive regardless of intent, timing, or the number of years since the original tragedy. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and this one takes the craziness up a notch. In episode Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, Meg catches the mumps at a Star Trek convention, gets converted by Kirk Cameron's religious TV show, and outs Brian as an atheist to the entire town. The community responds with the kind of rational, measured tolerance you'd expect from people who just learned someone doesn't share their beliefs, meaning they try to stone him with a Prius. The episode tackles religion, atheism, and whether it's worse to be a non-believer or someone who ruins Star Trek conventions by spreading infectious diseases. Peter drags the family to the annual Quahog Star Trek convention, described as the one day a year when sci-fi fans take their lips off loaded gun barrels and spend half a day adjusting to sunlight. Stewie purchases authentic blueprints for building a transporter. He worships Patrick Stewart's Picard over Kirk because Picard accepts baldness with quiet cool that says, "I am in command. You are safe with me. I will cradle you in my arms through any crisis in any galaxy." Brian asks if Stewie is queer. Stewie admits he probably is. The self-awareness is refreshing from a character who typically lacks any introspection whatsoever. Patrick Stewart gives an inspiring speech about following your dreams. The question and answer session goes completely off the rails. Stewie asks about household sponge buildup. Stewart recommends thoroughly wringing sponges after each use because a dry sponge is a happy sponge. Jonathan Frakes gets asked about a leg itch diagnosis, dry skin from hot showers. Gates McFadden fields a question about artesian well water pressure. 0 Star Trek questions get asked. One angry fan storms out screaming about getting his questions answered one way or another. Meg poses for a photo with what Peter thinks is someone in an amazing alien costume. Turns out the guy has the mumps. He came to a Star Trek convention actively contagious with a highly infectious disease, which tracks for the kind of person whose social calendar revolves around conventions. Dr. Hartman reveals Meg never got immunized because it was 1992 and Lois couldn't be bothered with anything that didn't involve Dan Cortese. Peter also never got the mumps shot. The doctor warns that adult mumps can spread to the testicular glands. Peter thinks his testicles are in his feet. The doctor clarifies they're under his penis. Peter believed they were sandbags to prevent floodwaters from floating into his bum. Meg spends 5 days bedridden watching the Religion Channel. Kirk Cameron's show, Kirk and the Lord, Just Hanging, targets lonely, picked on, unappreciated people who feel unloved. The show asks if Meg feels like nobody cares about her. Lois walks in with soup at that exact moment, but the message already landed. Meg emerges from her room fully converted to Christianity. She's been washed in the blood of the Lamb. The episode announces this will be a Meg episode and helpfully reminds viewers where the remote clicker is because nobody would blame them for changing channels. Meg wants to share God's word with everyone, starting with her family. She insists they say grace before dinner. Peter asks God for cheat codes to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out because he's been stuck on Bald Bull for 4 years. He starts explaining different button combinations to God before offering to show him a porn website upstairs. Meg tries again. Brian reveals he's an atheist. The family reacts like he just admitted to war crimes. Lois says being an atheist is about the worst thing a person can be. Peter warns Brian won't get anything for Christmas. Meg calls him Beast and claims dominion over him, commanding him to believe in God. Brian explains he sees no evidence for God. The Hubble telescope discovered wonders of the vast universe but never photographed a bearded guy sitting on a cloud. Peter threatens that God will get Brian with a Kodak disc camera, a reference so dated it needs archaeological excavation. Meanwhile, Stewie successfully builds his transporter and brings the entire Next Generation cast to his house against their will. The Star Trek actors spend the episode bickering with each other, complaining about Michael Dorn hogging the limelight, arguing about whether McDonald's still makes McDLTs, and being generally insufferable. Stewie can't pronounce Will Wheaton correctly, calling him Weil Wheaton repeatedly. The whole subplot serves as a reality check that beloved TV casts are probably disasters behind the scenes. Meg gives an interview to the local news outing Brian as an atheist. Tom Tucker reports this shocking development. The mayor says he'd rather have a terrorist living among them, because at least terrorists believe in God, even if it's a smelly brown god, according to his casually racist assessment. Someone throws a Prius at Brian's head. The town becomes violently hostile. Stores refuse to serve him. Bars won't give him alcohol. Brian reaches peak desperation and sends Chris to buy booze, pretending to be an adult. Chris asks if he looks grown up. Carl, the cashier, immediately recognizes him. The disguise fools absolutely nobody. Brian hallucinates that kitchen items are talking to him, begging him to drink them. Arnold Schwarzenegger appears as a bottle, telling him to get to the chopper. The alcohol withdrawal is hitting hard. Brian lies to Meg, claiming he's seen the light and believes in God now. He asks her to spread the news around town, specifically at the liquor store and the Clam. Meg takes Brian to participate in God's work. The work involves a book burning. Meg wants to destroy everything harmful to God. Brian realizes he can't support this. He confesses he lied for booze. Brian delivers the intervention Meg desperately needs. He asks if God would have given her a flat chest and fat ass. Would God put her on Earth looking like Peter instead of Lois? What kind of God places her in a house where nobody respects her enough to even get her a mumps shot? The harsh truth breaks through. Meg admits Brian is right. She abandons her newfound religion. Brian explains that figuring out life's answers is part of the human experience. The real answer to existence will be more unimaginably amazing than anyone can conceive. The camera pulls out to reveal they're being watched by Rob Lowe and Adam West as cosmic beings discussing whether there are monsters under the bed, preparing to get up in the morning to make movies as big Hollywood actors. Stewie finally sends the Star Trek cast home after declaring them the most insufferable group of jackasses he's ever spent time with. He hopes they all die. The actors immediately start arguing about carnival prize tickets and pencil toppers. The experience ruins the next generation for Stewie permanently. The episode ends with the revelation that beloved fictional universes are better left fictional because meeting your heroes guarantees disappointment. The episode generated controversy for its treatment of atheism and religion. Critics argued it portrayed atheists as pariahs, deserving violence while simultaneously mocking religious extremism. The show tried walking a tightrope between respecting faith and criticizing militant believers. The execution landed somewhere between thought-provoking and offensive depending on viewer perspective. The episode aired in 2009 when religious discourse in America was reaching fever pitch. Family Guy jumped into that minefield with characteristic subtlety, meaning none whatsoever. Whether the episode successfully satirized both extremes or just offended everyone equally remains debatable 15 years later. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this is where things get out of hand. In episode Road to the Multiverse, Stewie wins a genetically perfect pig with human fists at the carnival and reveals he got it from a parallel universe using a homemade multiverse device. He and Brian embark on dimension-hopping madness through infinite alternate realities, including a Disney universe with casual anti-Semitism, a world where dogs rule humans, and a universe inhabited solely by one really far-away guy who yells compliments. The whole thing plays like someone gave Rick and Morty's concept to Family Guy 3 years before Rick and Morty existed. Stewie wins a pig at the carnival with perfectly sculpted fists that can throw punches. Brian asks how he bred this genetic masterpiece. Stewie admits he got it from a farm in a parallel universe. He explains multiverse theory. Infinite universes coexist on parallel dimensional planes, each with different realities ranging from slight variations to radical differences. Every possible eventuality exists somewhere. Brian pretends he already knew this by repeating dimensional planes, like he's familiar with the concept. Stewie calls him out for being transparent. The dynamic is perfect. Stewie, the genius inventor, Brian, the pseudo-intellectual who gets exposed constantly. They visit their first alternate universe where Christianity never existed. Without the dark ages of scientific repression, humanity advanced 1,000 years faster. This explains the muscular, genetically perfect pigs. They see Quagmire contract AIDS from unprotected sex, then immediately cure it with NyQuil, cold flu, and AIDS, because in an advanced society, STDs are treated like common colds. Meg walks by looking like a supermodel with 36D breasts. Stewie notes she's still considered one of the ugly ones in this universe. If Brian saw Lois, he'd need to put his penis in a wheelchair. Brian needs to poop. The bathroom digitally removes it and beams the waste to another dimension. This becomes a running gag. They visit the Sistine Chapel. With no Christianity to inspire Michelangelo, John Hinckley got the painting job instead. The ceiling is covered with images related to his attempted assassination of Reagan and obsession with Jodie Foster. Brian asks about all the Renaissance art Christianity inspired. The answer is depressing alternative history presented as visual comedy. Next universe, a Flintstone-style reality where everything is rocks. Peter and Lois have rock sex with a rock phylactic for protection. The audience laugh track plays after every terrible pun. Brian asks to get the rock out of here. They escape to a universe where America never dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, so Japan never surrendered and won World War II. Everyone in Quahog speaks Japanese. Peter farts and giggles. They leave immediately. The device malfunctions and takes them to a universe where everyone has two heads, one happy, one sad. Every conversation becomes a duet of contradictory emotions. Lois asks Peter to take out the trash. Happy Head agrees delightedly. Sad Head complains about standing being tiring. The news anchor announces puppies and plane crashes simultaneously. Stewie admits the device hasn't been fully tested. They're stuck, jumping randomly through universes with no clear way home. They land in an Ice Age universe. Stewie can't reach the device to press the button. They're trapped and freezing. Brian's tail starts wagging when Stewie compliments him, carving through the ice. Stewie exploits this by offering walks, treats, car rides, and sleeping in the bed privileges Brian apparently never gets. Brian's enthusiastic tail wagging breaks them free. The scene is both clever problem-solving and emotional manipulation. They visit a universe where everyone has to poop right now. Business meetings happen with everyone simultaneously defecating. Nobody acknowledges it. They move on quickly to the Disney universe, where everything is animated in classic Disney style. Everyone sings cheerful songs about pie. The animation is gorgeous. The music is intoxicating. Stewie wants to live there forever. Then a Jewish character appears and everyone screams, "Jew!" Stewie remembers this is a Disney universe, so the casual anti-Semitism tracks historically. They leave despite the shiny buttons. The Robot Chicken universe features stop-motion animation and characters from G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, and He-Man celebrating that their shows existed. Someone asks how it feels to be on a major network for 30 seconds. The response is bleeped profanity. They visit a post-apocalyptic universe where Frank Sinatra was never born, so he couldn't help get Kennedy elected. Nixon won instead and botched the Cuban Missile Crisis, causing World War III. The entire planet is vaporized. Lee Harvey Oswald shot Mayor McCheese instead of Kennedy. Stewie asks if that joke is in bad taste. Brian shrugs because the victim is a cheeseburger. A blocky, low-resolution 8-bit universe features pixelated characters speaking in stilted dialogue. A Washington Post political cartoon universe depicts everything as heavy-handed political satire. Brian appears naked, holding a dinner platter labeled McCain-Feingold. An overweight cat with dollar signs for eyes wears a Social Security hat while pouring an alternative minimum tax bucket over a sad Statue of Liberty holding a democracy umbrella. The satire is so on the nose it hurts. They escape before more metaphors arrive. The Compliment Guy universe contains one inhabitant, a distant figure who yells, "I like your shirt." They appreciate the positivity. The misleading portraiture universe tricks them. They're lost, convinced they'll never get home. Then they land in the dog universe, where canines rule and humans are pets. Brian loves it. Stewie hates it. Brian breaks the device during their fight. They're trapped. Peter treats Brian like a pet human named Hotchkiss, later changed to something with an X, because cool parents give kids names with X's. They meet neighbors. The neighbor's human Gabe bites Stewie. Joe, the human catcher, takes Gabe to the pound, where he'll be euthanized for biting a dog. Stewie and Brian meet another multiverse traveler who offers to send them home. Human Brian from this universe begs to come along. In a world where humans are in charge, he can finally reach his potential. They rescue Gabe and return home. Human Brian celebrates being white in their universe because that privilege is massive. He immediately gets hit by a car and dies. The episode ends with his corpse in the street, proving that freedom means nothing if you can't survive 30 seconds. The episode showcases impressive animation variety across universes while exploring infinite possibility through parallel dimensions. The concept allows Family Guy to parody Disney, Robot Chicken, political cartoons, and its own format. The casual anti-Semitism joke in the Disney universe generated controversy. Critics debated whether mocking Disney's historical prejudice was fair game or perpetuating harmful stereotypes. The dog universe role reversal forces Brian to experience what it's like being treated as property. The whole thing is Rick and Morty before Rick and Morty existed, proving Family Guy occasionally stumbles into genuinely creative storytelling when Stewie and Brian go on adventures together. Now let's move on to the next episode, and yeah, it gets ridiculous. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you enjoy our content. In episode And Then There Were Fewer, Family Guy does a full-blown murder mystery where characters actually die and stay dead. James Woods hosts a dinner party at a remote manor, gets murdered, and the investigation reveals nearly everyone had motive to kill him. By the end, 4 people are dead, including James Woods himself and Muriel Goldman. The episode plays like Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, but with more cartoon violence and way less British politeness. Everyone in Quahog receives mysterious invitations to a gala dinner in their honor at Rocky Point Manor for an entire weekend. Peter assumes it's celebrating his accomplishments. Joe thinks it's for his arrests. Quagmire believes it's for almost farting the alphabet before pooping on the S. They all arrive to discover everyone got identical invitations from an anonymous source. The whole town is there, the Griffins, Quagmire with his date Stephanie, Joe and Bonnie, Mayor West, Dr. Hartman, Mort and Muriel Goldman, Tom Tucker, and Diane Simmons, Consuela, Herbert, Seamus, Carl, Derek, and Jillian. The guest list reads like a Quahog census. James Woods emerges as the host alongside his girlfriend Priscilla. He announces he's become a born-again Christian thanks to Priscilla opening his eyes to Jesus Christ's love. He invited everyone to make amends because he wronged each person in some way. The entire room is skeptical. Peter points out Woods has been terrorizing their family for years. Woods promises they won't be disappointed and excuses himself to check on dinner. Stephanie sits in his chair while spouting astrology nonsense about his energy. A hidden gun fires. The cork doesn't hit her. The bullet does. She's dead. Everyone assumes Woods is the killer and runs for their cars. Peter backs into the bridge and destroys it. The storm has flooded the causeway. They're trapped on the island with a murderer. The phone lines are dead. Cell phones have no reception. Mayor West tries sending a message in a bottle, which solves exactly nothing. They discover Woods has a landline, but Peter worries about long-distance charges because they're guests. Joe checks anyway. The line is dead. The lights go out. When they come back on, James Woods is dead with a knife in his back. The body count is now 2. Peter asks if this is what black people see all the time, because apparently that joke needed to happen. Joe discovers the gun that killed Stephanie was rigged to fire at Woods' chair. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The real target was always James Woods. The killer had to improvise and finish the job with a knife. The question becomes, who wanted Woods dead? Everyone had motive. Tom Tucker reveals Woods ruined his acting career by convincing him to turn down the lead role in Nightmare on Elm Street. Seamus claims Woods thought he was a steak while they were on acid together and ate his arms and legs. Mayor West is angry about the Twitter handle. Dr. Hartman has grievances. Herbert complains about methamphetamines replacing his Cialis. Quagmire admits Woods stole Cheryl Teagues from him. The list of grudges is longer than a CVS receipt. They find Woods' list of misdeeds in a secret laundry room. He documented everyone he wronged. The most damning evidence points to Muriel Goldman. Woods talked her into illegally selling him OxyContin for his 19-year-old girlfriend. When Muriel threatened to cut him off, he blackmailed her by threatening to turn her in to the feds. The motive is crystal clear. Muriel denies everything and demands a lawyer. Then she disappears during another power outage. They find her dead with the same knife that killed Woods. The body count is 3. Derek goes to the roof trying to get cell phone reception to call police. He's found dead at the bottom with his skull crushed by a blunt object before the fall. A Golden Globe Award is missing from Woods' collection. That's the murder weapon. They search everyone's rooms as one group. The Golden Globe is found under Tom Tucker's bed. He travels with a giant poster of himself to help him sleep, knowing Big Tom Tucker is watching for nocturnal intruders. The evidence seems damning. They chase Tucker around a table before Peter suggests the revolutionary strategy of splitting up to go both directions. It works. Tucker is arrested. Lois talks to Diane Simmons before leaving. Diane mentions her mother bought her a blouse for her first solo broadcast. Lois realizes the problem. How could Diane's mother have known Diane would be anchoring alone when none of the murders happened until this weekend? Diane reveals herself as the killer. She explains everything in a classic villain monologue that answers every question except what happened to Stephanie's body. Diane turned 40. Tom Tucker pushed to replace her with a younger face. She'll be off the air in 3 weeks. Around the same time, James Woods dumped her after they'd been dating secretly. She paid intern Priscilla to seduce Woods and manipulate him into becoming born-again Christian, so he'd gather everyone he wronged. Diane planned to kill Woods and frame Tucker, destroying both men who ruined her life. Stephanie's accidental death forced improvisation. The power outage let Diane stab Woods. Priscilla woke up and became hysterical, so Diane killed her. Muriel caught Diane planting evidence, so Diane killed her. Derek went to call police, so Diane killed him with the Golden Globe. Every murder spiraled from the original plan going wrong. Diane pulls a gun on Lois. Peter calls asking for his car key, completely oblivious to danger. Lois tries signaling she's in trouble by acting unusual and calling him Pete. Peter wonders why she's acting weird, but decides listening to his tapes is more important than figuring it out. Diane prepares to shoot Lois. A gunshot fires. Diane falls dead. Someone saved Lois from off-screen. A mysterious figure helped but remains unidentified. The final line suggests it might have been Stephanie's corpse getting revenge. The episode generated buzz for actually killing off recurring characters permanently. James Woods voiced himself knowing his character would die. Muriel Goldman's death removed her from the show. The murder mystery format let Family Guy do a serious serialized story with genuine stakes. The ending twist with Diane worked because she'd been present the whole time with access and opportunity. The unsolved mystery of who shot Diane and where Stephanie's body went created lingering questions. The episode proved Family Guy could execute complex plotting when the writers wanted to, even if they usually preferred random cutaway gags. The whole thing demonstrated that an animated comedy could successfully pull off a feature-length murder mystery with actual consequences. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one is straight up chaos. In episode, Jerome is the new black. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire search for a fourth friend to replace Cleveland and decide they specifically need another black guy because that was the best thing about Cleveland. They meet Jerome at the Drunken Clam. He turns out to be Lois's ex-boyfriend, and Peter's jealousy spirals into arson and a ghost costume. Meanwhile, Brian attempts to befriend Quagmire and receives the most brutal character assassination ever delivered in an animated sitcom. The episode tackles race, jealousy, and friendship with all the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a china shop. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire sit at the clam, staring at Cleveland's empty seat. The absence haunts them. They try recruiting Kevin Connolly to be their fourth, but realize he's too small, and they steal his lucky charms. Brian volunteers. Peter explains that won't work because of the whole Quagmire thing. Brian discovers Quagmire hates him. The revelation hits like a brick to the face. Peter explains Quagmire thinks Brian is annoying, like people who never shut up about their dead kids. The group realizes they've been ignoring the obvious solution. They need another black guy. That was the best thing about Cleveland, according to unanimous consensus. They decide boring white guys need a black friend to stay interesting. Like how London gentlemen's clubs are just throat-clearing competitions that last for hours. Horace asks if they want to enter a darts tournament. A voice from off-screen asks if some fools need a fourth. Jerome appears. He joins their game. They celebrate having found a black man. The racial dynamics are uncomfortable from the start, but nobody acknowledges it. Jerome becomes an instant hit. He's cooler than a York peppermint patty Q cutaway about a man trapped on a frozen mountaintop who keeps eating York peppermint patties that transport him back to the mountain, slowly starving while trapped in an advertising loop. Peter invites Jerome to meet Lois. The revelation drops. Jerome and Lois dated years ago. Peter reacts with shock. Stewie wakes up asking if they're being robbed. Jerome holds baby Stewie and notices the necklace with Black Jesus, leading to a musical number about Black Jesus riding into town on Your Mama's Ass. Peter struggles with the knowledge that Lois dated Jerome. Lois makes jokes about it being 12 inches ago instead of years ago, then corrects herself while laughing. Peter cannot handle this information with any maturity whatsoever. His insecurity manifests immediately. Lois insists they're just friends, and Peter needs to relax. Peter decides he needs to get Jerome out of his life permanently. Jerome's house mysteriously burns down overnight. Lois offers to let him stay with the Griffins. Peter clearly burned down Jerome's house, but nobody can prove it. Jerome moves in. Peter's jealousy intensifies. He overhears Lois and Jerome talking about something hot and moist. They're eating scones, Jerome baked. Peter bursts in, expecting to catch them in a compromising position. Everything is innocent. Lois starts choking on a scone. Jerome performs the Heimlich maneuver. Their clothes somehow become constrictive and need removing. Peter watches this play out in increasing horror. Meanwhile, Brian executes a plan to befriend Quagmire. He sends a fake card claiming to be from Cheryl Tiegs, Quagmire's lost love. Quagmire arrives expecting his soulmate. Instead, he finds Brian. The betrayal is immediate. Quagmire reveals Cheryl Tiegs was the one who got away, the great love of his life. Since she left, he's been chasing girls to fill the void. Brian destroyed his chance at happiness. They go to dinner anyway because Brian insists on trying to establish friendship. Quagmire delivers a comprehensive destruction of Brian's entire character. The speech covers everything. Hitting on Lois constantly despite Peter paying for Brian's food and saving his life. Defecating in Peter's yard, being a sponge who never pays. Pretending to be deep while dating bimbos. The pretentious Catcher in the Rye lectures. Delusions about being a great writer. textbook liberal agenda without actual activism, driving a Prius like it makes him Jesus, not believing in religion while talking down to believers, failing college twice, being a terrible absent father, and worst of all, being a big, sad alcoholic bore. The speech is surgical, accurate, and devastating. Quagmire leaves. Brian sits alone, processing the truth. Peter escalates his campaign against Jerome by dressing as a ghost with a torch. The ghost costume fails to scare anyone. Peter directly confronts Jerome, accusing him of wanting Lois and demanding he leave. Jerome is heartbroken, believing he found a true friend. He leaves peacefully. Lois is furious with Peter. She gives Peter a gift from Jerome, an actual prop from Family Ties, one of Nick's garbage sculptures. The thoughtfulness destroys Peter's justifications. He realizes Jerome was genuinely a good person who valued their friendship. Peter finds Jerome and apologizes. He admits his jealousy got the best of him. Jerome was so cool that Peter worried he might steal Lois away. Jerome forgives him. They reconcile. Then Jerome casually reveals he had lots of sex with Meg while staying at the house. Peter responds that he doesn't care about that because Meg remains the family punching bag, even in moments of genuine emotion. Brian returns home crying. Stewie asks what happened. Brian admits Quagmire still hates him. Stewie delivers the wisdom Brian needs. He only needs one person to like him, and that person is himself. Stewie also likes Brian. He offers to let Brian sleep in his room. They go to bed together as friends. The episode ends on genuine sweetness after spending 40 minutes being deeply uncomfortable about race and relationships. The episode generated discussion about how the show handles racial dynamics. The premise of specifically needing a black friend to make the group interesting raised eyebrows. The casual way characters discuss race, including Jerome, making stereotypical references to grape soda and Pringles cans, walks a tightrope between satire and reinforcement. Quagmire's takedown of Brian became legendary among fans as one of the most brutal moments in the series. The speech articulated criticisms viewers had about Brian's character for years. Whether the episode successfully satirized racial awkwardness or just created more awkwardness remains debatable over a decade later. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one goes all over the place. In episode McStroke, Peter grows a mustache that consumes his entire personality, joins mustache culture, loses the mustache saving someone from a burning restaurant, gets rewarded with free burgers for life, eats 30 hamburgers in one sitting, and has a massive stroke that paralyzes half his body. Meanwhile, Stewie bets Brian he can become the most popular kid at James Woods High within a week and succeeds until an embarrassing incident involving his baby anatomy destroys everything. The whole thing tackles disability, fast food lawsuits, and high school social dynamics with characteristic Family Guy grace, meaning none whatsoever. Peter collects Cleveland's mail while he's out of town. The magazines include Grape Soda Today, Orange Soda Quarterly, and the Fruit Punch Reader, because apparently Cleveland's entire personality revolves around stereotypical beverage preferences. Stewie finds Mustache Aficionado magazine and decides growing a mustache will give him class and grace. Peter overhears and decides he's growing one too. The mustache transforms Peter's entire identity overnight. He claims it's like a wedding ring proving you're straight, referencing Freddie Mercury as an example. Brian points out Freddie Mercury was incredibly gay. Peter refuses to believe this obvious truth. Peter joins the Quahog Mustache Society, where members discuss sending Wilford Brimley a birthday card for his mustache's 70th birthday. They debate mustache awareness and promote the Must-Stash, a product whose slogan is, "You must stash your mustache in the mustache." The mustache community looks out for each other. When McBurgertown catches fire, firefighters specifically recruit Peter because his mustache qualifies him to operate a hose. Someone is trapped inside. Peter realizes saving them could cost him his mustache. He decides, great mustache comes great responsibility. He rushes in, the mustache burns off. The tragedy is complete. The rescued man is Todd Myers, McBurgertown's owner. To show gratitude, he offers Peter a lifetime supply of free burgers. Peter accepts immediately. He eats constantly to relieve the pain of mustachelessness. After consuming 30 hamburgers, Peter realizes he can't feel the left half of his body. Lois asks if he's winking at her. He's having a stroke. The doctor confirms the left side of Peter's body is completely paralyzed. Recovery may take a long time. 3 months pass. Peter remains partially paralyzed. He demands beer from Lois, then gets angry when she hands it to his stroke arm instead of his good arm. The disability becomes a running gag about Peter's helplessness and frustration. Brian mentions he's been in worse situations, like being Robin Williams' jumping-off point cue cutaway of Peter, suggesting topics that Robin Williams then riffs on manically for extended periods. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian make a bet. Stewie claims he can become the most popular kid at James Woods High within a week. If he wins, Brian has to download the dancing baby from Ally McBeal and forward it to all his friends, claiming it's hilarious. If Stewie loses, he has to inhale Meg's hat for 8 seconds. Stewie enrolls as Zach Savier, a transfer student from rich, expensive, car-driving, sex-having high school. He wears long-sleeve shirts under short-sleeve shirts under long-sleeve shirts. The kids declare him cool immediately. He becomes an instant hit, bigger than Will Smith and his nice, clean rap about respecting women and helping parents pay for school supplies. Peter discovers stem cell therapy. 5 minutes of fetal stem cell injections cure his stroke completely. He's back to normal. He decides to sue McBurgertown for causing his medical crisis. His cat lawyer, Meowsy McDermott, handles the case. The cat makes puns about being kitten me. They lose. The judge finds in favor of McBurgertown. Peter refuses to accept defeat. He goes undercover as an Asian businessman to infiltrate the company. The disguise is terrible. The manager gives them a tour anyway after Peter mentions millions of dongs. They discover the slaughterhouse called Dachau, spelled C-O-W, making it a Holocaust joke, according to the tour guide. A cow explains the horrors happening inside. His wife was killed there. Peter promises to expose these atrocities publicly if the cow testifies. They attempt an escape. Guards chase them. They successfully get the cow out and arrange for him to testify on television. The cow delivers an impassioned speech about courage, specifically praising people who eat salads despite looking gay. McBurgertown suffers massive publicity damage. The cow asks if he can stay with the Griffins. Peter awkwardly backtracks, claiming he never actually promised anything definite. Stewie's popularity peaks when he asks Connie D'Amico on a date to Anal Point. Brian explains what Anal Point is using a parking space metaphor. Stewie admits he'd rather be the parking space than the car in that scenario. The date goes terribly. Connie expects sex. Stewie reveals his baby anatomy, claiming he drank 8 gallons of water to prepare. Connie kicks him out of the car. At school, other students mock him for having a baby penis. His cool reputation evaporates instantly. He asks Connie for one last kiss. She agrees. He calls everyone over to witness her making out with a nude baby. The humiliation reverses onto her. Stewie declares he is who he is and walks away triumphantly while playing Bob Dylan music. The episode tackles disability through Peter's stroke without much sensitivity or educational value. The stem cell miracle cure resolves everything in 5 minutes, eliminating any need to explore living with permanent disability. The McBurgertown lawsuit parodies real cases against fast food companies while presenting the corporation as genuinely evil with their slaughterhouse practices. Stewie's high school infiltration demonstrates how easily teenagers can be manipulated by superficial coolness. The baby anatomy joke lands somewhere between uncomfortable and absurd. The whole thing proves Family Guy can address serious topics like strokes and corporate malfeasance, while simultaneously treating everything as set up for increasingly ridiculous comedy. Whether that's good television or just deeply irresponsible depends entirely on viewer perspective and willingness to accept cartoon logic as substitute for actual commentary. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this is where things explode. In episode Perfect Castaway, Peter goes fishing to feed his struggling family, gets told about the legendary Pelican's Reef, where fish are plentiful but no man has ever returned, ignores all warning signs, gets caught in Hurricane RuPaul, spends months stranded at sea eating Joe's legs, and returns home to discover Lois married Brian. The whole thing plays out like a soap opera written by someone who watched too much Gilligan's Island while high on cold medicine. Peter's fishing business is failing. He can't catch anything. His family faces starvation. He names a turtle Terrence, kills it, and hollows it out into an ashtray for Stewie because that's apparently normal behavior. An old sailor tells Peter about Pelican's Reef, where fish are abundant beyond imagination. The sailor emphasizes repeatedly that nobody has ever returned from there. Many have gone, all have been lost, vanished forever. The central theme of his presentation is that nobody comes back. Peter decides to go immediately because warnings mean nothing to someone with Peter Griffin's survival instincts. Peter takes Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland on the fishing trip. They play a drinking game called I Never, where you drink if you've done the thing mentioned. The confessions get increasingly disturbing. Quagmire admits to giving reach-arounds to spider monkeys while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. He also confesses to picking up workers from Home Depot to choke him while he touches himself. The game reveals way too much about Quagmire's personal life. Cleveland passes out. They write on him because that's what friends do. They find Pelican's Reef. Fish are everywhere. The catch is massive. They celebrate their success. Then Hurricane RuPaul hits. The storm is working his or her way up the coast, according to the news. Ollie Williams delivers the Blackie weather report. It's raining sideways. The hurricane destroys their boat. Death appears to inform them they're sinking. They go down with the vessel, swallowed whole by the treacherous, unforgiving sea. Days pass, floating at sea. Peter eats Joe's legs. Joe discovers this and understandably gets upset about his friend consuming his lower body. Peter acts like Joe is overreacting. They agree to disagree about the cannibalism, which is not actually how agreements work, but Peter Griffin logic prevails. They spot an island. They're saved. Peter feels like an explorer, comparing himself to his ancestor Ponce de Leon Griffin, who spent 8 years on a boat looking for the Fountain of Youth. Back in Quahog, a funeral is held. The community mourns the lost sailors. Lois declares vengeance on the murderous ocean. She throws rocks at the water. Meg makes a scene crying for her daddy. Lois tells her to stop because all their friends are watching. The family adjusts to life without Peter. Months pass. Lois struggles. Brian steps up to help. He gets a job selling cars to keep the family afloat. He helps Chris with schoolwork. He supports Meg. Eventually, Lois and Brian get married. On the island, Peter, Joe, and Quagmire pass time with hypothetical questions. Would they rather be blind or a midget? They initially choose blind because it heightens other senses to superhero levels. Peter points out midgets are funny little guys who get into shenanigans while smoking cigars and strollers. They're God's little punchlines. Everyone agrees midgets would be better. Peter suggests they need to have an orgy since they've been isolated for months. Nobody is interested. The toe-touching stops. Peter returns home alive. The reunion is joyful until Lois reveals she remarried. Brian walks in. The tension is immediate. Peter discovers his wife married his dog. Brian took care of the family during Peter's absence. He got a job, helped the kids, stepped into Peter's role. Lois explains she thought Peter was dead and needed support. Peter feels betrayed. He moves out. Brian and Lois maintain the marriage. Peter tries winning Lois back with increasingly desperate tactics. He shows up naked, claiming he forgot his clothes. He makes terrible pickup lines about magnets in her head, attracting his buns of steel. Lois resists at first. Eventually she caves. They start a secret affair. Brian suspects nothing initially. His co-worker at the car dealership asks if he's having problems at home because his sales are down. The co-worker points out the ex-husband is back. Brian works during the day. They have time to bump uglies. Brian dismisses this completely. Stewie records Peter and Lois having sex. He shows Brian the footage. Brian confronts the betrayal. He catches Lois sneaking out at night with a saddle. The evidence piles up. Brian realizes his marriage is built on Lois's unresolved feelings for Peter. He plays fetch with Lois using a ball, treating her like she treats him because he's still a dog and the power dynamics are weird. Brian watches the video evidence of Lois and Peter together. Brian makes the noble choice. He tells Lois their marriage isn't working. He suggests she get back with Peter. Lois is shocked. Brian explains she's the right woman for Peter, just the wrong woman for him. Peter thanks Brian for being a good friend. Everything returns to normal. Lois mentions she was about 1 day away from having sex with Brian and taking him around the world. Brian realizes what he gave up. He goes to the basement to handle his feelings privately. The show implies masturbation through euphemism. The episode explores what happens when someone presumed dead returns to find their life completely restructured. The premise has soap opera potential. The execution involves leg cannibalism and a dog marrying his owner. The Brian-Lois marriage creates uncomfortable dynamics that the show mostly plays for comedy, rather than examining the actual emotional complexity. Brian's sacrifice seems noble until you remember he benefited from Peter's presumed death and only gives up when caught cheating. The whole thing demonstrates Family Guy's approach to serialized storytelling. Set up interesting premises, resolve them quickly, return to status quo, never mention again. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and the craziness levels peak here. And subscribe to our channel. In episode Steroids, Stewie gets beaten up by baby girl Susie Swanson at a barbecue. Peter responds by injecting him with steroids, turning him into a vascular muscle monster, and Chris gets transformed from school loser to popular jerk by Connie D'Amico before getting publicly humiliated with footage of him tucking his genitals like Buffalo Bill. The whole thing explores toxic masculinity, high school social hierarchies, and whether veins pressed against skin qualify as attractive. Spoiler, they do not. Joe throws a barbecue. The men gather around the grill to comment on meat cooking because that's apparently required male behavior. Peter compliments the seer. Joe is told to scoop up a burger and put it back down in the exact same spot. Bonnie asks Lois to rub sunblock on her back. Lois takes off her shirt to avoid getting it dirty. The sunblock application goes lower than appropriate. Quagmire giggities enthusiastically. Joe mentions his son Kevin died in Iraq. Everyone responds with sad, and the conversation immediately moves on because processing grief takes too long. Stewie plays with Barbies. A baby girl named Susie Swanson steals his toy. Stewie chases her. She beats him up violently. Peter witnesses his baby son getting destroyed by a baby girl. The humiliation is complete. Peter worries this will lead to World War V, which skips over World Wars III and IV because it's so intense. Lois tries explaining that's not how sequential numbering works. Peter declares he has spoken and shuts down all debate. Chris attempts wooing Connie D'Amico by giving her the High School Musical 2 soundtrack. She delivers itemized insults. A. Don't ever listen to her talk because he doesn't deserve her words. B. She was speaking ironically when she said she liked it. And C. He actually likes High School Musical. What is he? 8? No, that's impossible because she's seen his big hairy mudflap ass in the locker room. The verbal destruction is surgical and efficient. Connie decides she needs a new challenge. She's dated every popular boy in school. They all suck. Her plan, date a loser and make him popular. Chris Griffin becomes the perfect candidate. He smells like Fred Flintstone's ass according to unanimous assessment. The makeover project begins. Peter takes Stewie to the gym to teach him to be a man. Real men drink beers and project their inadequacies onto their kids. Peter asks Stewie if he thinks he's better than him, then launches into a rant about promotions and accomplishments. Stewie tries lifting weights. He fails. A stranger at the gym offers Peter a dirty needle with steroids. Peter trusts this advice because if there's anyone you can trust, it's a stranger at the gym holding a dirty needle. Stewie gets injected. The transformation is immediate. Stewie becomes massively muscular. He's full of energy and ready to work out. His body looks grotesque. Brian says he looks like Lou Ferrigno's poop. Stewie disagrees, claiming he's hotter than phone sex with a blind girl. His example involves a blind woman who doesn't know what she's wearing, which is somehow supposed to be attractive. He has the power. The steroids consume his personality completely. Connie transforms Chris from loser to popular kid. She fixes his hair, gives him a pencil-thin douchebag beard, and takes him to the pep rally. Chris says something genuinely sweet about liking her and wanting to be with her long-term. Connie is shocked. No guy has ever said anything that nice to her before. Chris suggests maybe she's been dating jerks. They skip the pep rally for a movie. The relationship develops actual emotional depth, which is dangerous for a high school popularity experiment. Chris becomes genuinely popular. The jocks greet him by name with various nicknames: Griffa, Griffamano, Chrissy. They invite him to make a single mother pizza worker feel like a slut because she's struggling to raise a family. Chris is thrilled. He's never been accepted before. Connie brings him home for dinner to meet Peter and Lois. Peter immediately sexualizes Connie's appearance, asking what she's doing with her boobs. Chris is embarrassed. Peter makes extended terrible jokes when meeting Connie's dad, who passed away 4 years ago. Stewie becomes increasingly aggressive on steroids. He charges a toll to use the hallway. Brian can't get downstairs without paying $10. Every time Brian tries speaking, Stewie punches him. The violence escalates. Stewie claims he was just messing around when Brian finally makes it through. The roid rage transforms him into a bully worse than Susie Swanson ever was. Chris throws a party. Only cool kids are invited. Meg gets rejected from a party at her own house because her ass to boob ratio is way off according to the popular kids. She's devastated upstairs while the party happens below. Lois tries comforting her. Brian gives her a Sylvia Plath book and a bottle of Ambien, then looks the other way regarding whatever happens next, which is deeply inappropriate parenting. Chris gets caught cheating on Connie at his own party. He's making out with other girls. When confronted, he He claims beating up a Jewish kid made him popular, not Connie's makeover efforts. Meg and Connie team up for revenge. They create a plan involving the audio-visual department and a school assembly. Chris announces a cool kids club meeting. Then video plays of him recreating the Buffalo Bill tuck scene, asking if people would have intercourse with him. The humiliation is nuclear. Everyone turns on him instantly. His popularity evaporates. Connie regains her social status through the rules of high school revenge dynamics. Stewie's steroids wear off. He wakes up weak and normal-sized. Brian charges him a toll to use the hallway. The tables have turned. Chris apologizes to Meg for being a douche. She asks what it was like being popular. Chris describes it as basking in the warm glow of higher intelligence, becoming part of everlasting glory. He flew. The experience transcended normal human existence, even though it was built entirely on superficial social manipulation and cruelty. The episode explores how artificial enhancement destroys authentic personality, whether through steroids or popularity makeovers. Stewie becomes an aggressive monster. Chris transforms into a cruel jerk. Both lose themselves pursuing external validation. The steroids wear off. The popularity disappears. Everyone returns to baseline. The lesson exists somewhere beneath the layers of inappropriate humor and cartoon violence. Whether anyone learns anything remains questionable. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and this one is a whole new brand of chaos. In episode, Baby, You Knock Me Out, Peter drags Lois to Foxy Boxing, where women in bikinis fight each other. She accidentally becomes a professional boxer after destroying her opponent, and Peter becomes her fight promoter despite Lois only doing this to channel her anger at him. The whole thing culminates with Lois fighting Deirdre Jackson, a killer who's murdered 3 people in the ring and makes Peter moo like a cow. The episode tackles domestic frustration, violence as therapy, and whether boxing is an appropriate outlet for marital rage. Peter can't sleep because he's too excited for his birthday. He gave out all his invitations yesterday, specifically excluding Meg from the party because her presence would ruin everything. His birthday arrives. Lois gives him a globe. Peter thinks it's a planet. Lois explains, it's Earth and you use it to learn where countries are. Peter is offended she gave him an educational toy. Cleveland sends a recorded birthday card that plays a message, then cuts to Cleveland driving while singing MMM Bop by Hanson before getting pulled over, shot at, and chased by police. The whole sequence plays out while Peter holds the card. Everyone acts like this is normal. Peter's real present from Lois is tickets to Foxy Boxing, where women in bikinis box each other. The guys attend. 2 women fight in the ring. The announcer asks for challengers to fight the house champion. Peter volunteers Lois, using a plaster mold of her hand and forearm he made without her knowledge, which raises questions about when he made this and why. Lois reluctantly agrees to shut everyone up. The fight starts casually. Lois asks if they're going to pretend to hit each other, then maybe kiss a little. The opponent punches her hard. Lois asks her to watch it. The woman hits harder. Peter yells at them to punch each other. Lois snaps. She calls her opponent a little bitch and asks if she wants to fight for real. She unleashes fury. She tells the woman that no matter what she does for the rest of her life, she'll always be garbage. The knockout is brutal. The crowd goes wild. A fight promoter approaches Peter. He says Lois is a natural who could make serious money as a professional competing for a belt. Peter loves the idea because he really enjoys watching her box, which means 2 things according to Peter. Lois wakes up the next morning to find her picture in the Daily Growl. Brian thinks that's a real paper. Peter explains it's just dogs barking. The squeaking sound amuses everyone. Peter announces he's a fight promoter now and booked Lois another fight at the Quahog Civic Center. Lois refuses. She says it was a one-time drunken thing. Peter offers to take her somewhere fancy and romantic for dinner in exchange for the chance to convince her to fight. Lois agrees to dinner but insists she won't change her mind. Peter takes her to the boxing match. He makes her wear special eating gloves. She realizes too late these are boxing gloves. Peter booked the fight without her consent. Lois tries canceling the match. The bell rings. Her opponent is from Ukraine and doesn't speak English. Lois tries speaking Ukrainian. Peter claims she's from the other part of Ukraine with a different dialect. The fight begins. Lois gets knocked down. Peter taunts her from ringside, asking what's wrong and if she's mad at him. In his imagination, he has long eyelashes. Lois gets angry at Peter's taunting. She channels that rage. She stands up and destroys her opponent. The knockout is decisive. Lois realizes she feels great, more in control than ever before. Lois starts training seriously at the gym. Brian questions why she's taking this so aggressively when she's usually measured and collected. Lois explains that when she stepped into the ring, something happened. She tapped into a primal wellspring of pent-up anger that needed releasing. Brian asks what she has to be angry about. Peter immediately demands flapjacks, threatening to break a window for every 5 seconds he doesn't get them. He breaks 3 windows while yelling about how everyone is being as irresponsible as he is. The source of Lois's anger becomes crystal clear. Lois trains montage style to Gonna Fly Now from Rocky. She punches so hard she breaks her nose. Dr. Hartman says the fight is off. Peter protests because they're making a lot of money. Lois doesn't care about money or boxing. She only did this because of Peter. She admits that when boxing, she pretends she's fighting him. Peter is shocked to learn he's that much of a bastard. Lois confirms that yes, sometimes he is. Peter apologizes and says she doesn't have to fight anymore. Lois agrees to retire. She admits she got most of the anger out of her system anyway. Quahog holds a retirement ceremony with a statue dedicated to Lois after 17 consecutive victories. Peter announces a keg party at his house where he lies about his parents being there. Deirdre Jackson interrupts. She's the deadliest fighter in women's boxing who's killed 3 people in the ring. Her fists are so dangerous she's not allowed to be a lesbian. Deirdre calls Lois scared and challenges her to a fight. Lois refuses. Deirdre approaches Peter and flirts with him aggressively. Peter gets down on his hands and knees. Deirdre makes him moo like a cow while she mimes milking him. The humiliation is public and complete. Lois snaps and accepts the fight. The match is televised. Tom Tucker provides commentary alongside Floyd, a horribly disfigured former fighter who provides barely intelligible analysis. Deirdre predicted she'd kill Lois in round 6. The fight is brutal. Lois struggles. Joe gives her a pep talk in the wrong corner about being the toughest woman he's ever met. Peter realizes he's in the wrong corner and starts to give his own speech, but the bell rings. Round 6 arrives. Deirdre knocks Lois down hard. The referee tells her to stay down or she'll die. Lois gets up anyway. Eye of the Tiger plays. She unleashes everything she has. The knockout is spectacular. Lois wins. Peter celebrates. The crowd goes wild. Lois retires as champion. The episode explores using physical violence as an outlet for relationship frustration. Lois channels her anger at Peter into beating other women unconscious. Peter profits from this arrangement until he realizes he's literally the punching bag she's imagining. The resolution comes through Lois, defending Peter's honor when someone else humiliates him publicly. The whole thing suggests that marital dysfunction works best when redirected towards strangers in a boxing ring, rather than addressed through communication or therapy. Whether this constitutes healthy relationship advice remains questionable 15 years later. Now, let's move on to the next episode, and the mess only grows from here. In episode Stewie, Chris and Brian's excellent adventure, Chris faces failing 9th grade unless he passes his history final. So Stewie and Brian use a time machine to take him on an educational tour through historical events. Chris gets called a moron, runs away onto the Titanic, and they all nearly drown before Chris saves everyone by throwing a man off the lifeboat. The whole thing ends with Chris accidentally preventing his history teacher's ancestor from being born, replacing him with Teacher Doug, who doesn't believe in tests. Principal Shepard summons Peter and Lois to discuss Chris's failing grades. Chris currently has a D- average. His only hope is passing tomorrow's history final. If he fails, he repeats 9th grade. Peter promises to help Chris pass, the same way NASA counted on him during the Apollo 13 crisis, where his solution was ordering coffins and replacement dads instead of actually saving the astronauts. Peter nails Chris's bedroom door shut so he'll have no choice but to study. He accidentally leaves his phone inside. Lois sends increasingly explicit photos. Chris sees them all. Peter realizes both of Lois's hands are visible in the photos and asks who's taking the pictures. Chris studies all night but learns nothing. He's convinced he'll fail and amount to nothing, ending up as one of those bus drivers parents don't completely trust. Brian and Stewie find him devastated. Stewie suggests using his time machine to actually show Chris history, instead of making him learn from books. They decide to pretend it's a dream, so Chris doesn't know about the time machine, because once people know you have one, there go your weekends like owning a pickup truck. They wake Chris, claiming he's dreaming. Chris gets excited about no consequences and immediately attacks Brian. Stewie rewinds 6 minutes to try again, telling Chris he's dreaming with consequences. They begin the historical tour. First stop, Washington, D.C., 1803. Thomas Jefferson tries convincing Congress to approve the Louisiana Purchase, arguing they're getting Oklahoma, Arkansas, Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Louisiana. His closing argument is, what are the chances all those states suck? They visit Paris, 1920, where Ernest Hemingway drinks at a bar with other American writers. Hemingway is cheerful and declares he loves life and all people, before his later depression. Brian steals Hemingway's pen. They visit Brazil before soccer balls, Australia before shark tooth necklaces, and Italy before pasta, where Italians already speak in vowel sounds and make ridiculous hand gestures. They visit Omaha Beach on D-Day, 1944. Nearby is Double D-Day, where busty women distract German soldiers from fighting. They witness George Washington crossing the Delaware River while wearing water wings because he's terrified of water. They stop at Jane Austen's house in 1798 specifically to release pent-up time travel farts because apparently that's a thing. Jane Austen inhales deeply and declares she's fueled by the insides of men. Brian makes a personal stop in pre-Soviet Russia to shoot Pavlov for being a dog-teasing dick. Stewie gives money to a young performer to pursue his dreams. Brian realizes it was young Hitler before all the crazy stuff. Stewie insists that timing makes it okay. Stewie quizzes Chris on what he's learned. Chris's biggest takeaway is that you can't take a good nap with keys in your pocket. Stewie explodes. Chris hasn't paid attention to anything. He's absolutely hopeless. Stewie declares that Chris is incapable of anything else, that ninth grade represents the absolute zenith of his ability. Chris doesn't know what zenith means. He guesses it means TV. Stewie calls him a moron and says the whole trip has been a complete waste of time. Chris gets upset, calls Stewie a jerk, mentions winning a bowling tournament, confusing what they're even doing, and runs off crying. They search all over London. Chris is nowhere. Then they hear him yelling from a ship. He got on a fancy boat and stole Stewie's return pad to taunt them. The ship is the Titanic. Without the return pad, they're stranded in 1912. They must get on the ship. They jump onto a mooring rope and pull themselves aboard. Stewie is amazed by the magnificent ship, specifically pointing out the brocade fabric. They split up to search. Brian goes to steerage to wade through gross Irish and Italians. He finds everyone there claims to be the baby. Stewie dines at the captain's table, where everyone was the first person to refrigerate something. One guy refrigerated shoes for cool toes. Stewie gave the string quartet sheet music for Highway to the Danger Zone. Brian finds him and reminds him he's supposed to be looking for Chris. They spot someone with a whole chicken stuck on his head. It's not Chris. The actual Chris is enjoying himself at the ship's bar. Stewie and Brian confront Chris. They need the return pad to get home. Chris argues that if they're so worried about the disaster, they should alert the crew and save everyone. Stewie refuses because they can't alter the past, first rule of dreaming, he claims, and also because saving the ship would require talking to like 80 people, and he's not in that mood. The ship hits the iceberg. They try using the return pad. It's destroyed. The electronics are waterlogged. Stewie needs parts that don't exist on the ship. They must reach dry land. Brian panics about dying. He's never even successfully made love to a woman in the shower. The physics don't work. Stewie devises a plan. Most lifeboat survivors were noblewomen. He gives them backstories. He's Lady Antonia Tyler Carrington, Duchess of Lancashire. Brian and Chris are just two sluts with him. They find a lifeboat, but it has a Southwest Airlines-style attendant making jokes. Another lifeboat is full. Chris offers sexual favors. The man declines, saying Chris is the fourth person to offer, and he's spent. They're trapped. They'll drown on the Titanic. Chris refuses to accept this. He throws a man off the lifeboat into the water, declaring they're getting on. A woman tries giving Chris her baby. He refuses, saying if he takes one baby, he has to take everyone's baby. They escape. Chris saved their lives. Stewie apologizes for calling Chris a moron. Chris may not be book smart or history smart, but he's throw people off the boat smart, and that's the best kind. They return home. Chris thinks it was all a dream about a ship called the Gigantic. He's definitely failing the test. Stewie hopes killing one extra man on the Titanic didn't alter the present. They realize the man Chris threw overboard was Nigel Harpington, the ancestor of Chris's history teacher, Mr. Harpington. By killing him, Chris's teacher was never born. The next day at school, Chris meets teacher Doug, who doesn't believe in tests. Everyone cheers. Chris accidentally solved his own problem through time travel murder. The episode proves that sometimes the solution to academic failure is traveling through time and committing strategic homicide to prevent your teacher's bloodline from existing. Whether this constitutes sound educational policy remains debatable. The time travel mechanics raise questions about paradoxes and consequences that the show cheerfully ignores in favor of getting to the punchline. Chris learns nothing about history but everything about removing obstacles through violence, which probably wasn't the intended lesson but perfectly tracks for Family Guy's approach to problem solving. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this is where the chaos hits hard. Peter Griffin becomes a Nielsen family and immediately gains godlike power over all television programming, in an episode that functions as the animated equivalent of giving a toddler the nuclear launch codes. The family gets selected to monitor viewing habits for ratings. Peter starts making wild suggestions to every network that desperately wants his viewership. He acquires 100 Nielsen boxes to multiply his influence, ruins television completely, gets attacked by an angry mob, and fixes everything by gathering TV creators in a warehouse to rebuild programming from scratch. The whole thing plays out like someone gave the remote control to the least qualified person in America and said, "Have fun destroying an entire industry," which honestly tracks for how actual Nielsen families probably work. Anyway, the Griffin family visits the Quahog Fire Department where Stewie pretends to be a fireman and Peter learns absolutely nothing useful. They receive mail from the Nielsen Company. The letter explains the Griffins have been specially selected from millions of American households to have their viewing habits monitored for measuring television ratings. Peter asks for the beginning, middle, and end explanation again because his attention span rivals a goldfish with memory problems. The Nielsen representative uses puppets to explain. Peter dislikes the left puppet because the chin looks scary, which seems like a reasonable critique, honestly. The family celebrates becoming Nielsen members with various music cues until they find the right triumphant fanfare. Tom Tucker appears at their door after hearing about their Nielsen status. He desperately wants them watching Channel 5 news. Peter suggests Tucker lose the mustache covering a Hitler-looking birthmark, which caused problems at his old job in Street Louis, where someone presumably noticed. Tucker agrees to shave. Peter recommends a festive hat to make things more festive. Tucker accepts this suggestion too. Peter asks if Tucker can end each broadcast by trying to pull start a very cold chainsaw. Tucker agrees to everything, because ratings matter more than dignity apparently. The next broadcast features all these changes. Tucker eulogizes his mustache, whose ashes got sprinkled off Acapulco, where the mustache was born. He struggles with a chainsaw. Prairie dogs pop up looking concerned whenever sad news gets reported. The local news becomes unwatchable within approximately 24 hours of Peter's involvement. Brian warns Peter about being thoughtful with his choices. People rely on local news for several stories annually about how saltwater taffy gets made. Peter dismisses this concern because he just received the coolest toy on the planet, well, except for Hungry Hungry Alec Baldwin's, where Baldwin eats everything without touching the lever, then freaks out about a plane crash killing everyone. Lois suggests Peter should exercise more responsibility. Peter wishes he could affect national shows with his single Nielsen box. The representative returns to check equipment and change the card. Peter gives him the rest of the day off with 2 tickets to Sandra Bernhard's one-woman show in seats located directly in the gap of her teeth. Peter reveals he acquired 99 additional Nielsen boxes. The family now functions as 100 Nielsen families. Peter calls Mad Men Production, asking for John Hamm. He asks if he caught Hamm at a good time, or if Hamm and the critics are busy sucking each other's butts, which honestly captures how Mad Men discourse functioned during its peak. Peter says the show feels boring and offers suggestions for jazzing things up. Hamm dismisses him initially. Ratings immediately drop 50%. Hamm calls back, begging for suggestions. The next Mad Men episode features Don Draper holding a lightsaber while pitching Lucky Strike cigarettes using the Star Wars theme. Peter adds roller skates to Breaking Bad for reasons unexplained. He requests Dateline reveal the killer immediately, instead of making viewers wait 2 hours. The announcer confirms, yes, the ex-boyfriend did it, saving everyone 120 minutes. David Letterman reads Peter to sleep with random vamp noises, and Paul Schaefer's terrible off-key lullaby. Cops gets remade with banana guns. Peter creates a show called Creeping Up on the Kardashians, where a guy with a ponytail sneaks up and scares them during business meetings and fat-waxing appointments. Television becomes unwatchable across every network and cable channel within what appears to be 72 hours of Peter gaining influence. An angry mob forms outside the Griffin house. Someone complains Peter put a real cougar on Cougar Town, and Courtney Cox ripped it apart with teeth and claws. Another viewer protests Anderson Cooper 360 becoming Anderson Cooper 720 because Cooper turns around too much now. The Biggest Loser got converted to metric system, and the weight loss feels insufficient. Peter gets hit in the face with a brick thrown by the first woman who ever threw anything, which tracks as weirdly specific character development. Peter goes to the hospital for treatment. Dr. Hartman refuses to help because Peter ruined television. The drunken clam denies Peter entry. Joe, Quagmire, and Cleveland won't let him sit with them. Horace bans him from the bar entirely. Peter becomes persona non grata across Quahog faster than someone who spoils Game of Thrones endings on social media. Brian suggests Peter still has the boxes and could use that power to restore television by watching quality programming. Before Brian finishes this thought, the angry mob returns and destroys every single Nielsen box. Peter's one chance to fix television gets obliterated in approximately 15 seconds. Peter realizes he can gather all the television creators to rebuild programming from scratch. He assembles J.J. Abrams, Mark Burnett, Dick Wolf, various Bravo executives, and everyone responsible for workplace comedies where people talk to cameras for mysterious reasons. He assigns tasks rapid fire. Abrams creates something totally confusing involving aliens and koala bears in Eastern Europe. Burnett makes reality shows where people do horrible things for embarrassingly small sums of money. Dick Wolf produces the same Law & Order 6 times. Bravo finds women who will inevitably fight each other. Everyone else makes talent shows. Kelsey Grammer lingers awkwardly with nothing to do. Peter apologizes for having no assignments left. Grammer announces he'll take his ease on the lanai. Peter doesn't care what Grammer does now, which perfectly captures Kelsey Grammer's career trajectory post-Frasier, honestly. Television returns to normal. Mike and Molly makes jokes about ordering everything except salad. Peter apologizes to his friends for screwing up their favorite shows. They forgive him. Everyone drinks to having TV back in the hands of people who know what they're doing. Peter immediately suggests Zach and Cody would be funnier in their underpants. The episode ends, suggesting Peter learned absolutely nothing from this experience and will definitely cause problems again given any opportunity, which honestly makes him the perfect representation of how actual television executive decision-making functions in real life anyway. Now let's move on to the next episode, and this one's even more chaotic. Peter Griffin creates a newspaper comic strip called For Pete's Sake that offends the entire internet through casual misogyny, forcing the family to flee Quahog in episode The Simpsons Guy, which functions as the animated crossover event nobody asked for, but everyone watched anyway. They end up in Springfield, where Peter befriends Homer Simpson, discovers Pawtucket Patriot Ale is basically stolen Duff beer, gets sued for copyright infringement, and fights Homer across Springfield landmarks in a 20-minute brawl that destroys half the town. Peter reads Dennis the Menace in the newspaper and complains the kid is just shoveling snow helpfully. He creates For Pete's Sake, featuring observations that make you shake your head. The newspaper publishes his work immediately after an editor accepts Peter's subreddit of superhero thong shots as payment. The first comic shows a wife washing dishes. The internet explodes with outrage faster than someone posting spoilers on release day. Peter appears on The Flow to defend his work. The next morning's cartoon proves even worse. Gloria Steinem's half-birthday gets disrespected. Protesters gather outside the Griffin house throwing bricks. Peter submits one final comic before fleeing town, comparing himself to Michael Jordan, going out on top amid gambling rumors. The family drives all night with Peter tying the steering wheel to his belt. Someone steals their car at a gas station. A sign reveals they're in Springfield. Peter warns against drinking the water because everyone looks like they have hepatitis. They enter the Quick E Mart, where Apu offers donuts. The Griffins have never heard of donuts, apparently, which contradicts everything about Peter Griffin's relationship with food. Homer Simpson emerges, offering to pay since the family has no money. He explains he was once poor enough to steal donuts. Homer provides 12 donuts that becomes 8 through Apu's creative counting. Homer and Peter bond over donut consumption techniques. They become instant friends based entirely on shared appreciation for circular fried dough. The Simpsons host the Griffins until they find their car. Chief Wiggum explains, police procedure involves checking if they contributed to the policeman's ball. Without contribution, the report goes into the circular file that never gets checked. Bart meets Stewie and shows him the weapons closet. Stewie falls in love with the simplicity of a slingshot compared to his usual lasers and time machines. They make prank phone calls to Moe's tavern. Bart asks for leaky bum. Moe yells, asking if anyone has a leaky bum. Stewie tries next by calling to report assault. Bart questions if that counts as a prank call, which raises valid concerns about Stewie's understanding of humor versus trauma. Lisa befriends Meg and tells her she matters. Peter yells from downstairs that Meg doesn't matter, maintaining consistency across universes. Lisa gives Meg her saxophone. Stewie kidnaps Nelson and forces him to eat shorts as revenge for bullying Bart. He also kidnaps Bart's other enemies, including Apu, because Stewie wanted to say, "I took Apu." Brian loses Santa's little helper during a walk, and spends the episode pretending various things are the dog while performing terrible impressions. Homer and Peter search for the stolen car using methods including drinking gasoline at a gas station to think like cars. They throw a car wash, promising free service for stolen cars, then planning to charge when found. This attracts every car thief in Springfield who receives a sultry performance to "Pour some sugar on me." They find the car being driven by Grandpa Simpson. Peter gives Homer a 6-pack of Pawtucket Patriot Ale. Homer tastes it and immediately recognizes it as Duff beer, but worse. The Duff Brewery sues Pawtucket Patriot for intellectual theft. The trial features Fred Flintstone as judge, who rules in favor of Duff, despite noting both beers are pale imitations of Bud Rock. Peter blames Homer for destroying Quahog's largest employer. Homer apologizes, but admits he loves Duff because the beer keeps secrets, never says no, and experiments more than any partner, which reveals concerning information about Homer's relationship with alcohol. Peter declares he's over The Simpsons. Homer gasps. They fight. The brawl lasts 20 minutes. They fight through Springfield nuclear power plant, causing radioactive explosions. They battle across town, destroying landmarks including Krusty Burger and the elementary school. Peter strangles Homer. Homer protests this really hurts. Peter questions why Homer strangles Bart constantly. Homer defends this as normal parenting. Peter points out that explains why Bart is fat, stupid, and masturbates constantly. Homer corrects him that describes Peter's son. The fight continues, with both gaining radioactive superpowers and transforming into giant monsters. Buildings crumble. Citizens flee. The destruction reaches apocalyptic levels until both collapse exhausted in a crater. Peter tells Homer to say hi to Maud Flanders. Homer counters Peter should say hi to Muriel Goldman. Peter asks who that is, because Muriel Goldman remains such a minor character, even her death went unnoticed. Neither can remember why they're fighting. They make peace, agreeing to stay a half-hour away with garbage between them. The families return to respective towns. Bart rejects Stewie's friendship because Stewie freaks him out. Stewie threatens self-harm if they lose touch. Bart walks away. Stewie sobs while claiming he's a lone wolf who doesn't need anybody. The episode generated discussion about crossover episodes serving marketing rather than creative purposes. The extended fight sequence showcased both animation styles and signature gags. Whether this qualified as must-see television or corporate synergy disguised as content remains debatable. The whole thing proved that putting two popular things together creates something people will watch regardless of quality, which honestly sums up most crossover event programming across television history. That's it for today. If you want more videos like these, subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you in the next one.